Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 6 real ghost encounters in Old Cemeteries, we return to the forgotten corners of America where rusted gates creak open on their own, where the grass never grows right, and where the dead have been known to rise in whispers. These are not legends. These are not campfire tales. Every encounter you're about to hear is real, told by the ones who stood in the presence of something cold, something watching, something that did not belong to the world of the living. This month, my goal is to reach 4,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers drift in, listen, and disappear back into the dark without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the night. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a cemetery in your town that truly unsettles you, type its name below. Because when the lights go out and the soil settles, some spirits refuse to sleep. Kill the lights. Still your breath, lean closer, and let us begin. My name is Ryan, and I'm from Millvale, Pennsylvania. I don't know if you've heard of it. Most people haven't. It's one of those small river towns outside Pittsburgh that you pass through without really meaning to. We've got a couple of churches, a pizza place that changes owners every few years, and a funeral home that's been there longer than anyone can remember. The house I rent is on a little hill, just off the main road. If you stand on my front porch and look straight ahead, you're staring right at the cemetery. I lived there with my older sister, Jenna. She moved in first, actually. She needed a cheaper place after her divorce, and then the guy she was going to split rent with bailed at the last second. I was still working nights then and crashing on a friend's couch, so it kind of worked out. She called me and said, "Look, it's not fancy, but it's cheap, and the neighbors are quiet. They're all dead." I remember rolling my eyes, but honestly, that's the kind of joke you make when your front view is a bunch of headstones. The house itself is nothing special. 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, a living room that always smells a little like old carpet, no matter how much we vacuum. We've got a small front porch with one of those motion sensor lights the landlord swears is for your safety. The cemetery is right across a 2-lane wrought iron fence. Old stone gate and rows of headstones marching up the hill behind it. Some stones are straight and white and polished. Some are cracked and leaning, names worn down to almost nothing. By day, it's honestly not creepy at all. Kids cut through it to get to school. Old guys walk their dogs along the fence line. Sometimes you'll see flowers propped against a newer headstone or a little plastic windmill stuck in the ground. From our porch, it just looks like part of the town, like anything else. A little overgrown in places, sure, but peaceful. I got used to drinking my coffee in the morning and just kind of staring at it, watching the light move over the stones. I work at a small hardware store a few blocks down, nothing special. Mostly paint, screws, lawn tools, that kind of thing. I usually open up at 8 and I'm back home by late afternoon. Jenna works at a dentist's office across town, 9 to 5, very standard. Our evenings are pretty tame. We make dinner, we watch whatever show we're half interested in, we argue about dishes, we go to bed. The cemetery is just there, like a neighbor who never talks. The town itself is quiet. You hear trucks on the highway sometimes, and when the river's high, you can hear it if the wind's right. The streets get empty early. By 10 at night, you can stand in front of our place and maybe see 1 car go by every 15 minutes. You hear dogs barking somewhere far off, sometimes a train if the air is still. The cemetery blends into that dark shapes, little flashes of white from the stones when a car headlight passes. It's not dramatic. It's just background. For the first few months, I barely thought about it. If you live next to something long enough, no matter what it is, it becomes part of the wallpaper. Things didn't start feeling strange right away. It happened in little, chopped up moments that didn't seem related at first. The first thing I really remember is the gate. There's a big old iron gate at the front of the cemetery, with a latch that squeaks when you open it. In the daytime, it's always open. At night, it's supposed to be closed. There's a small faded sign that says grounds closed after dusk. Nothing official looking, but people mostly respect it. One night, I was out on the porch around 11, just scrolling on my phone. It was one of those cool early fall nights where you can see your breath if you stand still long enough. The bugs were still out, but quieter. I remember that. It was really still. I heard the gate squeak. I looked up, expecting to see someone cutting through. Maybe a teenager or someone walking their dog late. The motion light on the porch had clicked on when I stepped out, so it threw this weak yellowish glow across the road. I could see the gate clearly. Nobody was there. The gate, though, was slowly swinging inward, like someone had just pushed it. It wasn't fast or dramatic, just this slow, steady movement. I watched it all the way until it stopped, hanging slightly open. The wind picked up a little a second later, but not enough to move it again. I told myself it was the wind, obviously. Iron gates don't close perfectly. They get shifted out of alignment. Maybe it had been almost open already. I went back inside, told Jenna about it, and she just smirked. "Cool," she said. "We've got free entertainment. Ghost Gate." A couple nights later, I noticed the flowers. There's a row of older graves along the front fence, right where our porch light hits. The names are half gone on most of them. One in particular just has a first name you can barely read and nothing else. No dates, no last name. The stone is low and chipped, kind of sunk into the ground. When I first started living there, it was just bare grass in front of it. Nothing special. Then one morning when I was leaving for work, I saw fresh flowers there. White ones. Not from a store, more like someone picked them from a yard. They were stuck right into the dirt in a little bunch. No ribbon, nothing. I didn't think much of it. Somebody in town remembering an ancestor? Whatever. But the next week, they changed. Different flowers. And the week after that, again. Jenna noticed them too. "Who visits that one?" she asked one morning, squinting across the road while sipping her coffee. "You can't even read the name." "That's kind of sweet, actually," I agreed. It was sweet. Just odd. Because I never saw anyone bring them. I'd see people in the cemetery during the day sometimes, but never at that particular grave. And I was on that porch a lot before work, after work, late at night when I couldn't sleep. Still, it wasn't the sort of thing you get worried about. It just slid into that mental category of small town stuff I don't totally understand. The sound came later. The first night I really heard it, I was up later than usual. Jenna had gone to bed already. I had the TV on low, and the porch door cracked open to let in some cool air. It was past midnight, I think. The kind of hour where the whole town feels like it's holding its breath. There was a soft gust of wind. It's just enough to rattle a branch somewhere. Then I heard what I thought was someone talking. It wasn't clear words, more like a murmur. Like when someone is on the phone in another room and you only catch the tones, not the actual conversation. It rose and fell, then faded. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing. I remember standing up, walking to the open door and sticking my head out. The motion light blinked on, humming quietly. The street was empty. The cemetery was just this big, dark shape across the road. I waited another minute, then heard a dog bark far away. That was it. I told myself it was the TV echoing weird, or the neighbors 2 houses down. Old buildings do strange things with sound. I closed the door and went to bed. Little things like that kept happening. The motion light would click on in the middle of the night. For no reason I could see. The gate would be open some mornings when I was pretty sure it had been closed the night before. Once I came home from work and thought I saw someone standing near that low grave with the worn name. Just a shape. By the time I looked again, there was nothing. I kept logic in front of me like a shield. It's an old town, old cemetery, old house. Things creak. Weather shifts. People visit graves at weird hours. None of it needed to be anything more than that. If anything, Jenna was the one who leaned into it. She'd say stuff like, "If I start sleepwalking and wake up over there, just drag me back, okay?" Or if the porch light flickered, she'd mutter, okay, we see you," in this joking way. It was all just background noise to us. Little stories to tell our coworkers. "You guys actually live across from the cemetery?" The cashier at the gas station asked once, when I grabbed coffee on my way to work. "Yeah," I said. "It's cheap." He laughed and shook his head. You must have got the caretaker's place. My uncle said they used to put the caretaker right across from the yard so he could watch for vandals. Long time ago, though. Before my time, I asked, any stories? Half expecting something dramatic, he shrugged. You hear stuff. People always think they hear stuff over there, but you know how it is. Once you expect to see something, your brain fills in the blanks. That made sense to me. I liked that explanation, and then things started lining up in ways I couldn't brush off as easily. It was the footsteps that really got to me. There's gravel along the edge of the road, in front of our house. Between the asphalt and the little strip of grass that leads up to our porch steps, at night, when a car isn't passing, the town gets quiet enough that you can hear pretty much anything outside branches. Cats, that kind of thing. One night, maybe a month after the first gate thing, I was sitting on the couch with the TV low, and Jenna was in her room down the hall, scrolling on her phone. It was around 10, not super late. I heard footsteps on the gravel, crunch, crunch, slow like someone walking right along the front of our yard. I muted the TV and looked toward the door. Someone out front? Jenna called from her room like she'd heard it too. Yeah, I said. Hang on. I got up and stepped onto the porch. The motion light clicked on. The road was empty. The cemetery gate was closed. There was no one walking in either direction. No car pulling away, no door closing. Just that faint sound of insects and some guys yelling faintly from down the street. But I know what footsteps on gravel sound like. I'd heard them. The next night, it happened again. Same time, give or take 15 minutes. Same pace. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I opened the door faster that time, like I might catch whoever it was. Nothing. This went on for a week, then stopped, then started again. Never any visible person to go with the sound. I kept telling myself it could be an animal dog's, or maybe the sound was bouncing weird from somewhere else. I thought about recording it, but every time I thought, tonight I'll catch it. Things would be quiet. Jenna started sleeping with her door closed. I know it's nothing, she said one night. Sitting at the kitchen table with her hands around a mug of tea, I just don't like hearing stuff outside my room. I already sleep like crap. You want to move? I asked. The idea of another move made my stomach knot. We didn't have money for that. She shook her head. No, the rent's too good. And like it's just, kind of weird. It's fine. I'm just being dramatic. She wasn't usually dramatic. That's what bothered me around that time. Started noticing how quiet it could get. You don't think about sound until you live somewhere that actually has silence. On some nights, especially when there was no wind, everything felt still. The insects would just stop. No cars, no dogs, no TV sounds leaking from other houses. It was like the town was holding its breath again in those moments. I sometimes thought I heard something from across the road. Not words exactly, more like the shape of words. A rustling that didn't match the trees, or a breath that didn't feel like wind. I would stand on the porch and stare at the dark rows of stones. And it was like waiting for a person you knew was standing in a dark room with you but couldn't see. I always went back inside. I always locked the door, even though that didn't make logical sense if it was just the cemetery. Things inside the house started to shift after that. One morning, I came into the living room and found dirt on the floor just inside the front door. Not a lot, just a few smudges, like someone had stepped in with muddy shoes and half wiped them. I looked at the bottoms of my shoes, then Jenna's. Both were pretty clean. You tracking dirt? I asked her when she came out of her room tying up her hair. She frowned. No, I came in the back last night. I was on the phone with Mom. You can check the back mat, it's a mess. The back door mat was more obviously dirty from both of us. The front one, though, had that one faint mark. A single line toward the living room and then nothing. We cleaned it up and didn't talk much about it. Then my keys started moving. Keep my keys on a hook by the front door. I'm actually pretty obsessive about it because I've locked myself out enough times to learn. One night, I came home from a late shift, hung them up, kicked off my shoes, and went to bed. The next morning, they weren't there. I checked my pockets first, then the kitchen counter, then the coffee table, getting more annoyed with myself each second. Finally, I found them sitting on the little table in front of the living room window, the one that faces the cemetery directly. They were placed neatly, not tossed. The metal was cold when I picked them up. Colder than the table itself. I assumed Jenna had moved them. When I asked, she shook her head. Why would I move your keys? You flip out when they're not on the hook. She was right. I do. I tried to build a normal explanation anyway. Maybe I was distracted and set them there without thinking. Maybe I was on my phone and didn't keep track. It happens. People misremember. Our brains fill gaps. I kept repeating that to myself. The next odd thing was the voice. It was a Sunday afternoon. It's bright and totally unscary. Jenna was out with a friend. I was in my room, folding laundry, music playing low from my phone. I heard her call my name from the living room, Ryan. Just like that. Normal, I answered. Yeah. And walked out, still folding a t-shirt. The living room was empty. Her shoes weren't by the door. Her car wasn't outside. I stood there staring at the couch for a second, feeling stupid. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No texts. I turned the music off and just listened. The house hummed quietly around me fridge, a bit of plumbing noise. The motion sensor light clicked on outside like it sometimes does. I saw it flash off the headstones through the front window. You know that feeling when your brain catches up a half step behind your body? I had that. I realized I was holding my breath. I let it out slowly and laughed once, just to break the tension. That's cool, I said out loud, even though no one was there. Very funny brain. Great job. I went back to my room, but I didn't turn the music back on. A couple days later, I mentioned it to Jenna, kind of casually, expecting her to make a joke. Instead, she went quiet. I heard you last week when you weren't home, she said. What do you mean? You were at work. I was in the shower. I heard you say, "Hey, Jen," from the hallway. I yelled, "Yeah," and opened the door and there was nobody there. I checked the driveway, and your car wasn't back yet. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. She shrugged and looked down at her mug. I didn't want to start something. If we start talking about it, it gets real, you know? We didn't say much for a minute. That cemetery used to be smaller, she added finally, almost as an afterthought. One of my patients told me that. They expanded it across the road at some point. But I couldn't really follow what she was saying, old lady. Kinda scattered. Things didn't feel real, but they also didn't feel fake. That's the only way I can describe it. I was caught in this middle place where everything could still be explained if you tried hard enough. But it was starting to take effort. I went to the town clerk's office a week after that. I didn't go there because of ghosts or anything. That's what I told myself anyway. I went because I was curious about the caretaker story the gas station guy mentioned. It felt like a normal thing to look into. Property history. Boring adult stuff. The clerk was a thin woman with gray hair pulled back tight. She had that look like she'd been doing the same job for 30 years, and nothing surprised her anymore. What's the address? She asked when I told her I wanted to see property records. I gave it to her, and she shuffled through a drawer behind her. She pulled out an old file, flipped it open, then frowned a little. Huh, she said. What? Nothing. Just... This lot has been split a few times. Lines shifted. Not unusual. She turned a few pages, then closed it. You're on the old caretaker plot, looks like. House has been rebuilt once, though. Fire in the 70s. What about the cemetery? I asked, did it used to be smaller? She glanced at me, then at the window behind me, where you could maybe see the tops of a few headstones if you leaned. Why are you asking? She said. I laughed. Morbid curiosity, I guess. She hesitated for a second, then said, they moved some stones, but they didn't move everyone. Cheaper that way. Back then, nobody was checking. That's how it was done. I waited for her to elaborate. So, people are buried where there aren't stones? I asked. She adjusted a pen on her desk, lining it up with a notepad. Records get messy, she said. Graves get lost. Those old plots aren't what people think they are. The way she said it stuck with me. Not dramatic, just tired. Can I see a map? I asked. Not today, she said. I'd have to dig out the old ones. They're not in great shape. She gave me a tight smile that pretty much said we were done. Anything else you need? I said no and left. I told myself she was just being bureaucratic. That's how those offices are. Still, I noticed that she never actually answered my question directly. After that, I started to notice one particular spot in the cemetery more than the others. That low, chipped stone with the first name half gone. It was right in the line of sight from my bedroom window. If I rolled over in the middle of the night and pushed the curtain aside, I could see it, just barely. Like a dark tooth sticking up from the ground. The flowers kept changing. Always fresh. Always simple, like someone had picked them that day. I don't know why I didn't just walk over to it during the day. It's not like there was a fence around that specific plot. I could have. A normal person probably would have. But I didn't. I told myself it didn't matter. That I wasn't one of those people who obsess over graves instead. I watched it from a distance and pretended. I wasn't. The night at the grave happened in late October. The air had that sharper edge to it. The trees along the hill were mostly bare. The cold settled in around the house earlier in the evening. I remember our heater kicking on with that burnt dust smell it always has at the start of the season. I couldn't sleep. That happened sometimes. My brain would just decide that midnight was a great time to replay stupid conversations from high school or worry about money. Jenna was already out. I could hear her snoring softly through the wall. I got up, pulled on a sweatshirt, and went to the kitchen for water. On the way, I glanced out the front window like I always do. The porch light was off. The sky was clear. The moon was bright enough that I could see the outlines of the headstones without any streetlights. The cemetery looked almost gentle like that. Soft shapes, silver edges. The gate was open. Just a little, but definitely open. I stood there for a long minute, hands still on the fridge door, staring at it. I could hear that stupid squeak in my memory like a recording, before I could talk myself out of it. I grabbed my jacket and shoes and went outside. I don't totally know why. I tell myself now that I wanted to prove something to myself, to the dumb part of my brain that had started jumping at every little sound. It felt like if I walked over there and saw nothing, just stones and grass and old flowers, then I could finally file all this under overactive imagination and move on. The air was colder than I expected. My breath came out in these small white clouds. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I crossed the road. It sounded exactly like the footsteps I'd heard so many nights. And that thought made the hair on my arms lift. The gate moved when I touched it. Not a big movement, just a little sway, like it recognized me. I pushed it open wider and stepped through. Inside, it was quieter. That sounds weird, but it was. The road noise, faint as it usually is, dropped away. The only sound was the wind moving through a few remaining leaves and the faint tick of something metal cooling. Maybe the fence. My eyes adjusted to the dark. The headstones rose around me in rows. Some had little American flags stuck beside them. Some had flowers, real or plastic. Some were bare. I walked toward the front row, to the low stone with the worn first name. It looked smaller up close. The letters were more eroded than I realized. I could just make out the curve of the first letter. Could have been an E, could have been an R, could have been nothing. The rest was just scratches and faint grooves the moss had half covered. There were no flowers this time. Just a dark patch of ground where they usually were. I stood there, hands in my jacket pockets, feeling stupid and stubborn and cold. I remember thinking, this is it. This is all it ever was. An old stone. Some weird sounds. I'm making a big deal out of nothing. I almost laughed and turned away. Almost. Then I heard it. It was right by my ear. Close enough that it felt like someone leaning in to tell me a secret. It said my name. Not loudly. Not breathy or dramatic. Just a normal speaking tone, low and matter-of-fact, like someone at the hardware store getting my attention. Ryan. Every part of my body went still. I didn't spin around. I didn't run. I just froze, staring at the worn stone in front of me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and my fingers going numb inside my pockets. My first thought wasn't ghost. Was there someone behind me? A real person. Some idiot messing with me. I made myself turn my head just a little, then more. There was no one there. Just more stones, the open gate behind me. The faint outline of our house across the road with the porch light still off. The air around me felt colder, but not like a blast of freezing air or anything. It was more like every bit of warmth had stepped back a few feet. "Hello?" I said. I hated how small my voice sounded. No answer. I stood there for maybe 10 more seconds. Maybe it was less. Time felt strange. The silence weighed on my ears. Then I did the most normal thing I could think of. I turned around and walked back to the gate. Not fast, not running. Just a steady walk, my jaw clenched so I wouldn't start shaking. The gravel crunched under my feet. The sound followed me across the road to the porch. I closed the front door, locked it, and leaned against it for a second, breathing slowly. I didn't tell Jenna about it the next morning. I didn't tell anyone. I went to work. I stocked shelves. I nodded along to customers. I avoided looking at the front of the store where we kept the gardening tools because the bags of soil stacked in rows reminded me too much of something else. That night, I went back to the town clerk's office. "I thought you said those maps were hard to find," I told her. She gave me a long look. I did. "I'll help you look," I said. I want to know how the plots line up." Across from my house, she sighed, got up, and disappeared into a back room. I heard boxes scraping and paper rustling. After a while, she came out with a rolled-up yellowed map. She spread it out on the counter between us. Old ink lines showed the cemetery, the road, our side. Some plots were neatly marked with names. Others were just numbers. There were eraser marks, corrections, crossouts. I traced the line of the road with my finger. Then the rectangle that had our house's lot number written in faded blue pen. "Right there," she said, pointing. "That's you. And this." I pointed to a small square directly opposite, inside the cemetery line. "Old family plot," she said. "Names worn off on the stone. We only have a partial in the records." She squinted, then frowned. "Huh? What?" "Looks like there was another Ryan listed here once," she said. "First name, at least. Hard to read. Could be something else." These were copied from older records. Lots of errors. I stared at where her finger rested. There was a smudge of ink that might have been letters, might have been nothing. "It's a common name," I said, my voice sounding too loud in my own ears. "Sure," she said. She rolled the map back up. "These old graves aren't what you think they are anyway." Same tired tone, same phrase, and then she gave me that closed-off smile again. "We done?" "Yeah," I said. I walked back home slower than usual. The cemetery sat there, across from the house like it always did, quiet and ordinary in the daylight. A kid on a bike cut through the path along the fence, earbuds in. A dog barked somewhere down the hill. It was all so normal that I started to feel stupid again. When I got inside, Jenna was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels. "You look weird," she said. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Did you sleep all right?" She hesitated. "I kept hearing you walking around," she said. "You were up late, huh?" I stared at her. "I wasn't," I said. "I went to bed right after you." She shrugged, eyes still on the TV. "Must have been the house settling or whatever," she said. "It sounded like you, though." I went to my room and closed the door. Sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the curtain. I knew that if I pulled it aside, I'd see that low, chipped stone in its usual place. The same patch of ground where the flowers always appeared. I didn't look. You can call all of this coincidence? I do, sometimes. You can say it's just a mix of bad sleep, a suggestible brain, and a house with crappy insulation. Names repeat. Records smudge. Sound travels strangely at night. The mind is good at building patterns where none exist. I haven't moved. The rent is still good. The town is still quiet. The cemetery is still there every morning when I drink my coffee, looking harmless and tired and ordinary, We got a new porch light a few weeks ago. The landlord put it in, said the old sensor was acting up. This one's brighter. It shines straight across the road, hitting the front row of headstones. At night, when everything goes still and the wind drops, I try not to listen too hard. I still keep the porch light on, facing the stones. My name is Luke, and I'm from Kittanning, Pennsylvania. I live in a narrow two-story house on a slight hill. It's a kind with vinyl siding that always looks a little dusty, no matter how much you hose it down. If you stand on my front porch and look straight across the road, you're looking at the cemetery. It doesn't have a fancy name on a stone arch or anything. It's just the cemetery, with a low iron fence and a chipped brick pillar on each side of the gate. I guess if you grew up here, it's like a part of the neighborhood. The same way as the Dollar General or the diner, I share the house with my sister, Megan. We're both in our 30s and still ended up living together again after college, which is kind of funny and a little depressing if I think about it too hard. She works nights as an RN at the hospital about 20 minutes away. I work days at the hardware store down on Butler Road. So we're like roommates that pass each other in the hallway. Her coming in with coffee at 7 in the morning, me grabbing my keys and leaving. We text more than we actually talk, and half the time it's about bills or groceries. Our routine is pretty boring. I open the store at 8, make sure the registers work, talk to old guys about lawnmowers and siding, then drive home around 5:30. She's already gone by then most days. I heat something up, put something on TV, and that's pretty much it. If the weather's decent, I sit on the front steps with a beer and watch the sun go down over the cemetery. The stones catch the last light, and the trees behind them turn into dark shapes with a strip of orange sky above. It's actually kind of nice. Peaceful. The cemetery itself is small, maybe a couple hundred graves at most. Some of the stones lean a little, and the older ones are discolored and hard to read. There's a narrow gravel drive that loops in from the gate and back out again. When cars go in, you can hear the crunch from my porch. The fence is a little bent in places. There's some overgrown spots where the grass gets away from whoever's supposed to mow it. In the summer, dandelions and clover pop up between the stones. In the winter, it just looks like a white field with gray teeth sticking out. Kittanning isn't anything special either. If I'm being honest, it's an old river town. Some old brick buildings, a couple of bars that never seem to close, and then newer stuff like the strip mall. A lot of people my age moved away. The ones who stayed either work retail, healthcare, or commute to Pittsburgh. Nights are quiet. You hear a few trucks on Route 28, some dogs barking in the distance, sometimes a train. If you stand outside late enough, the whole town feels like it's holding its breath. That's probably just me being dramatic. But that's how it feels. At first, the cemetery was just part of the view. If I couldn't sleep, I'd look out the front bedroom window and see the faint outline of the stones and the darker shadows of the trees behind them. The street lamp on the corner throws this weak yellow light that barely reaches the gate. When Megan moved in, she laughed about it. Of course, you'd pick the spooky dead people house, she said. But after the first week, she stopped mentioning it. It was just there, like our neighbor's yard or the mailbox. Most nights were pretty uneventful. Megan would clatter around getting ready for work, the coffee maker gurgling, the smell drifting upstairs. I'd be in bed, scrolling on my phone, half awake. Around 10 or 11, I'd hear a dog bark across town, or a car pass by and hit that little dip in the road that makes the suspension squeak. The wind would move through the trees in the cemetery, and once in a while the porch light would flicker like it always has since we moved in. Old wiring, I figured? The first weird thing didn't even feel weird at the time. One evening in late September, I was sitting on the steps after dinner. The air had that cool, dry feeling it gets right before a real fall kicks in. Leaves in the cemetery were starting to turn more yellow than red yet. The sky was already dimming, and I noticed the cemetery gate was wide open. That's not unusual by itself. People come and go. But I realized I hadn't seen a car pull in or out since I got home. I watched for a while. Nothing. No one moving between the stones. No car parked along the fence. Just the open gate. The wind picked up a little, and the iron gate squeaked just barely. I remember thinking, yeah, maybe someone just forgot to close it. Or the grounds guy left in a hurry. Something simple. After a few minutes, I went back inside, put on a game, forgot about it. A few days later, I noticed fresh flowers on one of the old graves. They were bright, like grocery store flowers, still wrapped in that crinkly plastic. The grave they were on was one of the older ones, the kind where half the name is worn away. I'd walked past that stone plenty of times when I cut through the cemetery to take a shortcut to the gas station. Nobody ever visited it. Suddenly there were flowers, perfectly centered, no dust or fading yet. It was kind of sweet, I guess. People do that. But I didn't see any car, and I didn't see anyone placing them. Megan made the first joke about it. She was putting on her shoes by the door, looking out the window, and she said, "Your little grave friends are getting visitors now. You making friends over there?" I told her about the flowers in the gate, and she just shrugged. "You work too much," she said. "You're starting to notice the background. That's all." She grabbed her badge and left. The door shutting with that soft thump it always makes. The next small thing was the motion light on the house. There's a light on the corner of the roof that points toward the cemetery. It's old and weak, but it still kicks on for raccoons or someone walking up the sidewalk. I never thought about it much. Then one night, it snapped on while I was sitting in the living room with the TV volume low. Just this sudden bright wash of light through the curtains. I checked my phone. It was 11:12 p.m. I remembered the time because I was in the middle of scrolling through a thread and glanced at the clock up top. I waited for the usual follow-up, like the rustling of an animal in the trash. Cans or a passing car. Nothing. Just a faint hum from the fridge and the TV. I walked to the window, pulled the curtain back and looked out. The light was shining on the front yard and on the road, then across to the cemetery fence. No animal. No person. The gate was shut. I told myself there could have been a cat or something that already moved on. The sensors on those lights are sensitive. I stepped out onto the porch anyway and just listened. The air had that chilly, almost metallic smell it gets when the temperature drops fast at night. The wind pushed through the trees, a soft hiss. Then, a few seconds later, the motion light turned off again. Everything dimmed back to its usual low glow. Little things like that kept happening. A faint voice when the wind picked up that I told myself was just someone a couple streets over. A small scraping sound from outside when I was trying to fall asleep, probably a branch against the siding. Ordinary stuff that just seemed to stack up. Each thing on its own was nothing. Together, they kind of sat in the back of my mind like a bunch of unanswered texts. The first time I saw the lantern, I thought it was a trick of the light. It was a Tuesday night, pretty late. Megan was at work and I couldn't sleep. I got up for water, then ended up standing at the front bedroom window, looking out like I do sometimes. The cemetery was mostly a dark mass, with the street lamp lighting up the gate area. At first I thought somebody was walking a dog with a flashlight, because I saw this little moving point of yellowish light drifting along inside the fence. But it wasn't a sharp beam, more like a small glowing circle, the way you see with a lantern in movies. It moved slowly between the stones, bobbing slightly, like someone carrying something on a short chain or hook. I squinted, trying to see if there was a person attached to it. I couldn't see anyone, just the light. It stopped near the center of the cemetery, at a spot where the older graves are. It hung there, swaying a little. Not wildly. Just a slow, gentle swing. Like it was catching the wind in a way that didn't match the trees. I remember saying out loud, "Come on," to myself, like I was annoyed at my own brain. I rubbed my eyes, looked again, and the light was still there, still moving back and forth. Then, over maybe 30 seconds, it seemed to lift just a little. Higher than where a person's hand would be, then higher still, like it was being pulled up on an invisible rope. It rose above the height of the nearest stone, then higher than the next one. At some point, it just winked out. No fade, no dimming. Just gone. I stood there, waiting for something else to happen. For a car door to slam, or laughter, or a flashlight click, but there was nothing. The insects outside had gone quiet at some point, and I hadn't noticed when. It was one of those deep, flat silences that makes your ears ring a little. I realized I was holding my breath, and let it out slowly. Then I told myself it was probably some weird reflection from a car or a phone across town. Glass does strange things at night. That sounded reasonable enough to climb back into bed the next morning. I almost didn't bring it up. At breakfast, Megan was half asleep at the table, stirring her coffee, scrolling through something on her phone. I mentioned seeing a light in the cemetery, trying to sound casual. "Like a lantern?" she said. I raised an eyebrow at her. "Yeah, kinda, I guess." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "They used to tell stories like that when we were kids," she said. "Lantern man, lantern ghost, all that. It's just some idiot with a flashlight. Don't make it weird." I asked where she heard those stories, and she frowned like she was trying to remember. "I don't know," she said. "School? Church? My friend Jess, maybe? It's just one of those things you hear." She shook it off, grabbed her bag, and left for bed upstairs. I stood at the sink, rinsing out my mug, looking at the cemetery through the window over the sink. In the daylight, it just looked like it always did. No lanterns, no anything. After that, it wasn't every night, but it wasn't just once either. Some nights I'd wake up around 2 or 3 and feel this urge to look out the window. Half the time, there was nothing. The other half, I'd see that little yellowish light somewhere among the stones. Always moving, always slow. Sometimes, it would drift along the gravel drive, then stop near the middle. Sometimes it would be already there when I looked. Once, I saw it sway back and forth like someone pacing, then rise and disappear again. I tried to catch it from the porch once. I thought maybe if I changed my angle, I'd see the person holding it. I pulled on a hoodie, stepped outside, and walked down the front steps. The air was cold enough that my breath showed in little white puffs. I crossed to the edge of the road, looking hard at the spot where I'd seen the light from upstairs. From down there, all I saw was darkness and a faint shine on the tops of a few stones. No lantern, no movement. But when I went back up to the bedroom window, there it was again. Same spot. Same slow swing. The sound started around then too. A few nights I heard footsteps on gravel. It's not loud, just a steady crush, 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 like someone walking along the driveway in the cemetery. When I opened the window to listen more closely, the sound would stop. I'd stand there, leaning on the sill, hearing nothing but the distant hum of the highway and maybe a dog bark. When I closed the window and stepped back, sometimes I'd hear that crunching again. It's faint but clear, and I wouldn't be able to tell if it was just in my head. I finally mentioned it to our neighbor, Mr. Hall. He's in his 70s and lives in the little brick house next door with a yard full of those spinning pinwheel decorations. I was helping him carry in a bag of rock salt one afternoon, and I said, "Do you ever see anyone over there at night? It's like walking around with a lantern or something." He stopped in the hallway and gave me this sharp look, like he was trying to figure out if I was teasing him. "Lantern," he said. "What kind of lantern?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Just a light, like an old-style one, not a flashlight." He shifted the bag in his arms and turned away. "Kids," he said. "They mess around. Use their phones, those camping things." "You don't worry about it," I said. I'd just been curious since I'd seen it more than once. He made this small noise, almost like a laugh, but not quite. "Some things just are," he said, and that was it. He didn't bring it up again. And when I tried to ask a follow-up, he changed the subject so fast it was almost clumsy. Talking about the football game that weekend, the cemetery has a tiny office, one-story brick building near the back with a little sign that just says grounds. It's not always open. One Saturday, I walked over during the day. The gravel crunched under my shoes and I could hear some crows in the trees. I told myself I just wanted to ask about volunteering, or maybe who I could call if I saw kids sneaking in at night. I had a whole reasonable story planned. The door was unlocked, but when I went in, nobody was there. It smelled like dust and old coffee. There were shelves with thick binders labeled by year and a couple of cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. A small fan sat on the filing cabinet, turned off. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. I checked my watch. It was around noon. You'd think someone would be there, but the whole place felt like it had been empty for a long time. On the desk was an open binder and a clipboard. The binder had typed entries, names, plots, dates. The clipboard held a shorter list, handwritten with a few names and lot numbers. I scanned it without really thinking about it. One name snagged my attention. L. Mercer. The last name stuck because it's ours. Luke and Megan Mercer. I don't know if that's what people mean when they say the bottom drops out of your stomach, but I felt this weird hollow feeling. I checked the date next to it. It was older. Decades, I told myself. Mercer isn't exactly rare. It's not Smith, but it's not like seeing your own social security number either. Still, I flipped through the binder pages trying to find the same name. I couldn't. The pages for that section jumped from one plot number to another, like something had been misplaced or maybe removed. It might have just been a filing mistake. I know that. But standing there in that quiet office, it felt wrong. I heard the door behind me creak and I jumped. It was just a woman in a navy jacket, early 50s maybe, holding a takeaway coffee. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her tone was polite but distant. I said I was just wondering who to call if I saw kids messing around in the cemetery at night. She stared at me for a second, then smiled without showing teeth. "We close at dusk," she said. "Nobody's allowed in after that." I almost mentioned the lantern, but something about the way she was watching me made me step back. "Right," I said. "Sure. I just thought maybe." She cut me off, still smiling. "If you see anything after dark," she said, "you should probably just stay inside." She took a sip of her coffee and glanced at the binder on the desk. "We don't really encourage folks to look at the records," she added. "They're not always up to date. Things get moved around. Paperwork gets lost. You know how it goes." I nodded, apologized, and left. As I walked back across the gravel, I could feel her eyes on my back. When I reached the road and turned around, she was in the doorway but already turning off the lights inside. After that, I tried not to look out the window at night. That lasted maybe 3 days. The fourth night, the motion light came on again at 11:09, almost the exact time as before. The porch light flickered twice like it was trying to choose a brightness and giving up. I told myself I'd ignore it. I sat on the couch and turned up the TV. A few seconds later, I heard the faint, steady crunch of footsteps on gravel. I muted the TV. The sound kept going for a few beats, then stopped. The house felt suddenly colder, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in a blink. I rubbed my hands together and exhaled, watching for visible breath, even though I knew that didn't really make sense indoors. Then the footsteps started again, only this time they sounded closer. No gravel, though, just a quiet, distinct step, like someone walking on wood. I told myself it was the house settling, or the furnace kicking on in some weird pattern. I walked to the front door and checked the lock, feeling slightly stupid. It was latched. The deadbolt was turned. Everything felt solid. When I turned around to go back to the living room, I noticed something on the floor, just inside the entryway. There were small, dark smears on the hardwood, leading from the door toward the hallway. Not big prints, more like scuffed ovals, each about the size of the heel of a shoe. I bent down and touched one with my fingertip. It was damp and gritty. I brought it up to my nose without thinking and smelled dirt. Dirt. The kind that clumps under your boots after you've been walking in a muddy field. I looked at my own shoes by the mat. Dry. Megan's work clogs were there too, streaked with whatever they use at the hospital, but not mud. I wiped my finger on my jeans and followed the marks. They went a few feet down the hall and then just stopped. No smearing at the end, no fading. Just there, then not. After a minute or two of standing in the hallway trying to come up with a really solid explanation, I grabbed some paper towels and wiped them up. I didn't tell Megan. It wasn't like I could say, "Hey, someone tracked cemetery dirt into our hallway last night, but don't worry about it." She did notice the cold, though. A few nights later, she was in the kitchen grabbing her thermos. When she said, "Did you mess with the thermostat?" I shook my head. "Feels like a fridge in here," she said, rubbing her arms. I tapped a thermostat with my knuckle. It read 69, same as always. "Maybe you're just tired," I said, "or getting sick." She glanced at the window over the sink.
"Ow. You could
See the top row of headstones from there? Lit a little by the street lamp? It's colder by the front," she said, almost to herself. Then she picked up her bag and left. The voices were the last thing before I really started to feel like I was losing it. Not full sentences, nothing like that. Just my name, once in a while. I'd be brushing my teeth, or halfway down the stairs, and I'd hear someone say, "Luke," in that normal, everyday way, like they were about to ask a question. Sometimes it sounded like Megan. Once or twice, it sounded like a stranger. But when I'd answer, there'd be no response. One night I was in the kitchen making a sandwich for work the next day. The porch light flickered and the motion light outside clicked on, shining across the yard and the cemetery gate. From the corner of the room, where the shadows gathered near the pantry, I heard my name again. Just a soft, clear Luke. I turned, expecting to see Megan standing there, maybe home early. No one, just the fridge humming, the clock ticking on the wall. I walked through the house, room by room, checked the back door latched, peeked into the basement stairwell empty. When I came back to the kitchen, the motion light outside was still on. I stepped closer to the window and looked out. For a moment, I thought I saw the faint outline of that lantern light across the road, in the middle of the cemetery. But the glare from my own motion light made it hard to tell. The next day, I went back to the cemetery office. This time the door was locked. Through the small window, I could see the desk and the binders, but the open binder from before was closed now. A piece of blank paper lay on top of it, like someone had thrown it there without caring if it lined up. I knocked once, then again, no answer. On my way out, I ran into Mr. Hall near his driveway. He was dragging his trash can to the curb. I asked him, "Hey, do you know who runs the cemetery office?" He shrugged. "Different folks," he said. "Depends on the week." I told him I'd been in there the other day, and the records seemed kinda messed up. "They've always been messed up," he said. "Those graves aren't what you think they are," said it fast, almost like he didn't mean to say it out loud. "What do you mean?" I asked. He frowned and shook his head. "Paperwork. That's all," he said, adjusting his grip on the trash can. "Don't start going through all that. You'll just upset yourself." Then he walked back up his driveway without looking at me again. That night, I decided I was done being spooked by my own window. If the lantern was some kid messing around, I wanted to see them. If it was just reflections, I wanted to prove it. If it was nothing, even better. I stayed awake on purpose, sitting in a chair by the bedroom window with the light off. The house settled around me, small creaks and sighs. Every now and then a car passed down the street, its headlights sliding along the ceiling like pale ghosts. Around 2 a.m, I saw it. The light appeared near the center of the cemetery, not drifting in from the edges this time. 1 second there was nothing, the next there was a small, steady glow. About the height of someone's chest if they were standing among the stones. It swung gently from side to side. I pressed my forehead against the glass. It started to move, a slow path between the graves, weaving a little like it was following some invisible route. As it moved, the porch light on our house flickered once, then stayed on. The motion light snapped on a second later, flooding the yard with harsh white light. I could see the tops of the stones more clearly now. Nothing else. Just the light moving. I realized slowly that it wasn't staying in the cemetery. It was coming closer. Not in a straight line, but still clearly in our direction. It drifted through the rows of stones, down toward the fence. The trees behind the cemetery swayed a little in the wind, leaves making that soft shushing sound. I couldn't hear any footsteps. No gravel crunch. Nothing but the wind. The light reached the fence and hesitated there, swinging a little more. Then it rose, not fast, but steady, as if someone was lifting it over the iron spikes. It cleared the fence, still hanging there, and then began to move again. Across the narrow strip of road, toward our house. I wanted to believe I was falling asleep with my eyes open. I blinked hard. The light kept moving. It wasn't lighting up the ground or the air around it the way a flashlight would. It was just itself, a contained little circle of yellowish glow. As it crossed into our yard, the insects went silent again. I hadn't realized they were still chirping until they stopped. The quiet was sudden and heavy. The light moved up our walkway. Somewhere downstairs, I heard a soft click, like a latch giving way. The motion light above the yard flickered, dimmed, then went out entirely, leaving only the weak porch bulb. The lantern glow reached the base of our front steps and started to rise, as if climbing them. I could see it reflected faintly in the glass of the storm door. That reflection was the only proof I had that it wasn't just in my head. Something real enough to bounce off glass. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just watched. The light reached the level of the doorknob and paused. There was a long beat of nothing. Then I heard my name, clear and close, as if someone was standing right inside my bedroom. Luke. It was my own voice. That's the part that stayed with me. Not Megan's, not a stranger's, mine, like I'd called out to myself from the hallway. I turned slowly, but of course there was no one there. When I looked back at the window, the lantern light was gone. The porch bulb steadied itself. The insects slowly started up again, one at a time, until the night sounded normal. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, there were faint, muddy marks again on the floor by the front door. Just to this time, like whoever it was had taken a single step inside and then changed their mind. I cleaned them up without thinking, but my hands were shaking a little. I thought about going back to the office, demanding answers, asking about L. Mercer and moved graves and what exactly Mr. Hall meant. I thought about telling Megan everything and letting her laugh it off until I started to doubt my own memory. In the end, I didn't do any of that. I went to work. I rang up boxes of nails and paint rollers. I talked about the weather with customers. I came home. Ordinary stuff. I still see the lantern sometimes. Not as often as before, but often enough that I know it wasn't just a phase or a trick of the glass. Some nights it stays on the far side of the cemetery, drifting between the stones. Some nights it doesn't appear at all. I've stopped trying to track patterns. I've stopped asking questions around town. People here know how to avoid certain topics. I haven't looked up the name from the cemetery records again. I haven't tried to match it to any stone. Somehow I already know I'd find it, and I don't really want to know where. I'm not sure who exactly is supposed to be in which grave over there, or how many times the paperwork has been shuffled around. I'm not sure any of that matters. These days when Megan leaves for work, I lock the door behind her and check it twice. I walk through the house, pick up anything that's out of place, and then sit for a while in the dark, listening. The porch light still flickers now and then. The motion light still clicks on in the middle of the night for no clear reason. Every so often, I hear footsteps on wood where there shouldn't be any, or my name spoken softly from an empty room. I tell myself there's a logical explanation for all of it. Old wiring, loose floorboards, reflections, mud tracked in by us and forgotten. The cemetery is just a piece of land with stones and names, and I'm just tired. That's the story I stick to. It's easier that way. I don't stand at the bedroom window as much now. I try not to watch the lantern when it appears. I don't cross the road at night anymore. Even if I left something in the car, I lock the door and leave the lights low and pretend not to hear anything else. I still keep the porch light on though, and I still point it toward the cemetery. My name is Mark, and I'm from Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. I rent half of a small 2-story house on a quiet street a little off the main drag. The kind of place where the loudest thing most days is the freight train. A mile away or some kid on a dirt bike cutting through the back roads. I work at the college down the street in the mailroom, sorting packages and scanning barcodes 8 hours a day. It's not exciting, but it's steady, and I'm home by 5 most nights. I live with my friend Kyle, who I've known since high school. He does it for a hospital out in Danville and works odd shifts, so we kind of pass each other like roommates on separate time zones. Our place sits directly across from a small cemetery. There's just a narrow 2-lane road between our front steps and the iron fence. When we first moved in, the landlord mentioned it like a joke. Some folks don't like the view, but they're quiet neighbors. I remember Kyle looking out the front window and saying, "Honestly, this is kind of nice. Free Halloween decorations." Back then, the cemetery just looked like part of the landscape, something my eyes slipped over like the trees or the telephone poles. I barely thought about it. Day-to-day life was pretty simple. I'd wake up around 6, have coffee at the kitchen table, and watch the sun come up over the stones while I checked my phone. Then I'd drive the 5 minutes to campus, spend the day in the back room dealing with stacks of Amazon boxes and textbooks, make small talk with the student workers. I usually got home around 5:30, cooked something basic, and either watched a game with Kyle or went for a jog if the weather was decent. On weekends, I'd mow the small patch of yard out back, do laundry, or walk downtown for a sandwich. I guess that's what I liked about it, no big surprises, just a rhythm. The cemetery itself is small and kind of charming in a rundown way. The stones are mostly alt-leaning, cracked, some sunk so deep into the grass you only see the top edge. There's a big maple near the middle that drops leaves everywhere in the fall, and a low stone wall along the far side where kids sometimes sit after school. The fence is black iron, chipped in places with a simple gate that squeaks when it swings. Most days you might see one older guy walking his dog along the path, or the groundskeeper pushing a mower in slow lines. In the evenings, it looks almost peaceful, like a park nobody really claims. Lewisburg itself is small and predictable. We've got the college, a couple of old churches, some brick storefronts, downtown coffee shop, pharmacy, hardware store, that kind of thing. The houses on our street are all a little worn but solid. The porches and small yards and plastic lawn chairs that stay out way past summer. People wave when you drive by. On clear nights, you can hear dogs barking somewhere across town and the occasional motorcycle echoing off the river. It's all very ordinary, which is probably why I never expected anything strange to happen here. The first odd thing was so small I didn't even mention it to Kyle. It was a Tuesday evening in late September. He was on a night shift, and I had just finished washing dishes. I stepped out on the front porch with my mug of tea, more out of habit than anything, and looked across at the cemetery. The gate, which the groundskeeper usually latched around 6, was standing wide open. It was breezy, and the branches were moving, but the gate wasn't swinging. It just hung there open, like someone had walked in and never bothered to close it. I stood there for a minute, listening. I could hear insects buzzing in the bushes and some far-off traffic on the highway. A dog barked once, and then stopped. Nothing moved inside the fence. Eventually, I put my mug down, crossed the road, and closed the gate myself, making sure to drop the latch into place. The metal was cold, colder than I expected for that time of evening. I told myself the groundskeeper had just forgotten and didn't think about it again. The next couple of weeks, small things like that kept happening. One morning, on my way to work, I noticed fresh flowers on a grave near the front, bright white lilies and some kind of small purple flowers in a glass jar. The stone was broken. The top half popped off and leaning, and I'd never seen anyone visit it. The dates on it were worn down, but you could tell they were old, early 1900s or something. It stuck out because everyone else's flowers, when they had them, were plastic and faded. These were new and smelled strong, even from the sidewalk. By the time I got home that evening, the flowers were gone. The jar was still there, tipped over, but the stems were just not there. I figured maybe a family member came back and took them, or the groundskeeper had moved them because of the broken stone. Logical stuff. Around that same time, our motion light started acting up. We'd installed it over the porch after a package went missing in the spring. It usually clicked on when a car passed or when one of us came up the steps. But now it would snap on in the middle of the night for no reason. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, see the glow leaking around the edges of my blinds, and hear the faint hum of the bulb. When I'd look outside, the porch and the strip of road would be empty. The cemetery across the street would be this flat, gray shape, all the stones just darker patches in the dark. I blamed raccoons mostly. This is Pennsylvania. We've got raccoons, stray cats, all sorts of things running around at night. A couple times I opened the door quickly, hoping to catch whatever it was, but there was nothing on the steps. Just the wind moving the trees and the gravel on the shoulder of the road, the far-off sound of a truck gearing down on the highway. The light would blink back off after a minute, and the insects would start up again. Kyle actually liked the weirdness at first. One night, when he was home, the light flicked on while we were watching TV. He paused the game and grinned at me. "Our ghost is back," he said. "Maybe it's just checking the porch for packages." I rolled my eyes and told him it was probably a cat. When we looked outside together, there was nothing. He made a couple more jokes about it over the next few days, but you could tell he was watching the cemetery a little more often too. I jog in the evenings, usually the same loop down our street, around the block past the high school, and back along the road that runs behind the cemetery. It's only about 2.5 miles, but it's enough to clear my head after work. One night in early October, just as the leaves were really starting to turn, I decided to cut the loop shorter and run past the front of the cemetery instead of behind it. The sun was going down, and the air had that damp, cold edge you get right before a real temperature drop. I remember the sound of the gravel under my shoes as I slowed to a walk near the gate, just catching my breath. The porch light on our house across the street wasn't on yet. The street lights hadn't clicked on either, so it was that dim, in-between light where everything looks flat. I wiped sweat off my face and glanced through the bars of the fence. That's when I saw her. She was standing beside the broken tombstone near the front, the same one that had the fresh flowers that one morning. She was turned slightly away from me, facing deeper into the cemetery. She wore a long white dress knot, like a wedding dress. More like an old-fashioned nightgown or something you'd see in a period movie. Her hair was dark and pulled back, and from where I stood, I could see one bare foot on the grass. I remember thinking that was odd, because the ground looked cold and a little wet. "Hey!" I called out without really thinking, like she might be hurt or lost. She didn't turn. I stepped closer to the gate, my hand going automatically to the latch. I didn't open it, though. Something about the way she stood there, so still, made me hesitate. There was no movement at all, no shifting. No little sway like you'd expect from someone standing outside in the wind. The maple branches were stirring above her, but she wasn't reacting. I blinked, and she was gone. It wasn't like she walked away. 1 second she was there, the next there was just the broken stone and the patch of grass. My first thought was that my eyes had played a trick on me, that the shape of the stone and the tree and the light had lined up just right. I stood there a moment longer, breathing hard, listening. The air pressed against my skin in this strange way, like when you open a freezer door. It wasn't that the weather changed suddenly. It was more like the cold came from a specific direction, sliding across the road from the cemetery toward me. The tiny hairs on my arms stood up. Then a car turned the corner behind me, its headlights washing over the fence and making me squint. When it passed, the darkness looked normal again. I laughed at myself quietly, shook out my arms, and started jogging home. By the time I reached our porch, I had figured out a list of reasons. Low blood sugar. Bad lighting, my brain turning a tree trunk into a person. You know how it is. When I told Kyle about it later, he looked way too interested. "Dude," he said, smiling. "You saw the woman in white. Every cemetery's gotta have one." "I didn't see anything," I said. "It was probably just that stone. The top's almost the same size as a person. If you catch it out of the corner of your eye..." "Sure," he said, dragging the word out. "Or it's our ghost." He liked to play it up, but he didn't jog past the cemetery after dark. When he went running, he stuck to the lit streets near the college. A couple of days after that, I stopped at the little general store downtown to grab some milk and cereal. There's a woman who works the counter there most evenings, Mrs. Keller, who's probably in her 60s. She's one of those people who always knows what's going on in town. When she rang me up, she glanced at my address on the receipt. "You're still over on Maple?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "The place across from the cemetery?" She paused for a second, like she was thinking of something, then just nodded and handed me the bag. "Quiet over there," she said. "Mostly?" I started to ask what she meant, but someone else stepped up behind me in line, and she turned to greet them. It wasn't like her to cut a conversation short. It stuck in my head more than it probably should have. The next weird thing was the records. I didn't go hunting for them, to be fair. It just happened. One slow afternoon at work, I ended up chatting with one of the student workers, history major, about old buildings in town. I mentioned my place and how it faced the cemetery. She lit up and said, "Oh, that's the one with the old burial plots." "The town records are messed up for that section." That got my attention. "Messed up how?" I asked. She shrugged. I don't remember exactly. Something in the archives about missing pages or an incomplete map. You could probably find it at the municipal building if you cared enough. She looked back down at her phone after that, so I let it go. But on my way home, instead of going straight back, I parked outside the municipal office. There's a clerk there who knows me by face, if not by name. She set me up in a small room with some old binders and a big photocopy machine. I told her I was curious about the cemetery across from my house and wanted to see if there was a map of the plots. She gave me this quick, unreadable look and said, "You won't find complete records for that section." She wasn't wrong. There were handwritten diagrams, lists of names and dates that started clear and then just stopped. For the older part nearest my house, the entries went up to a certain year and then jumped. Several pages were missing entirely, torn out clean. I found a small note scribbled in the margin of one page, plots 1 to 17, uncertain. Someone had circled it hard enough to indent the paper. Do you know why these are missing? I asked when I brought the binder back to the desk. She took it from me carefully and closed it before answering. There was a flood a long time ago, she said. Some things got damaged. Paperwork? I said, or the graves. She pressed her lips together like she was holding something back. Then she shook her head. Best not to worry about it, she said. You're just renting, right? Yeah, I said slowly. Then it's not your problem, she said, and turned to her computer, which was clearly the end of the conversation. After that, it got harder to explain things away. One rainy night in late October, I came home a little later than usual. The sky was low and gray, the kind of rain that's more like a mist that gets into everything. Kyle was at work. I unlocked the door, stepped into the hallway, and froze. There were muddy footprints on the floor. Starting just inside the front door and leading toward the living room, they weren't clear shoe prints exactly. More like the shape of a foot with the edges blurred, as if someone had walked in wearing thin socks that soaked up the mud. I checked my own shoes. They were wet, but I'd just come in and hadn't gone farther than the mat. The prints on the floor were dry around the edges. Older. Seriously, I called out, assuming Kyle had come home between shifts and tracked in half the yard. No answer. The house felt quiet. Not empty exactly, just very still. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen, but nothing else made a sound. Even the rain hitting the windows seemed muffled. I followed the prints into the living room. They stopped in front of the window that faced the cemetery. There wasn't a smear or a turn, nothing that showed the person walking away. It was like the last step was right there, facing the glass. I stood beside that final print and looked out. The cemetery was just a darker patch through the rain, dotted with stones. The gate was closed. I ended up cleaning the floor and telling myself Kyle must have wiped his feet badly, and the rest had faded. When he got home, I brought it up. He swore he hadn't been back since that morning. "Why would I lie about mud?" he said. "You're the one who hates dirty floors." I watched his face while he said it. He looked honestly confused, not amused or sneaky. That bothered me more than the footprints did. There were other little things after that. I'd put my keys on the small hook by the door and find them later on the narrow table by the window, right next to the cheap lamp we kept there. I'd close the deadbolt at night, double-check it, and then find it unlatched when I got up for work. I started telling myself I was just distracted, that maybe I was more tired than I realized. The house itself started to feel colder in a way that didn't match the thermostat. We kept it at a steady 68 through the fall, but there were spots at the bottom of the stairs, in the hallway outside my bedroom, by the living room window where the air felt 5 or 10 degrees cooler. If I stood there too long, my fingers would go numb. Kyle noticed it too. One night, he walked through the hall in a t-shirt, stopped, hugged his arms to his chest, and said, "Why does it feel like a meat locker right here?" "Draft," I said automatically, even though there were no windows nearby. He rubbed his arms and nodded slowly. "Yeah, draft. Cool." Sometimes at night, when I was lying in bed, I'd hear my name. Not loud, not like a shout, just a soft, almost questioning mark. From somewhere down the hall, the first couple of times I thought it was Kyle and answered, "Yeah," into the darkness. When he didn't respond, I'd get up and stick my head into the hallway. Nothing. Once I knocked on his door and pushed it open a crack, so only to see the empty bed. His car wasn't in the driveway when I checked. He was on the night shift. The way the voice sounded bothered me. It wasn't quite like Kyle. It was close, familiar enough that my brain filed it under safe at first. But there was something off in the rhythm, the way the sound faded at the end of my name, too slow. I tried telling myself I was half asleep and mishearing the pipes or the fridge kicking on. That explanation worked fine during the day. At 2 a.m, staring at the dark ceiling, it felt thinner. A week or so before Halloween, I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting through a stack of old mail the landlord had left in a box for us. He said some of it might be tied to the property stuff from before he took over. Most of it was junk old utility bills, a flyer for a plumber that didn't exist anymore, a faded postcard. At the bottom of the stack was a manila envelope with a rubber band around it. Inside were photocopies of older documents, a partial deed, some kind of survey, and what looked like a handwritten note. The deed copy listed a previous owner from decades back, nothing special. The survey, though, caught my eye. It was a rough map of the block, drawn in neat lines with measurements along each edge. Our house was a rectangle shaded in lightly. Across the street, the cemetery was another block of lines, but the fence line didn't match where it is now. It was drawn closer to the middle of the cemetery, like the road, our front yard, and even the porch would have been inside the original boundary, just above the line that now marks our yard. Someone had written a name in small, tight letters, E. Warren, Plot 7. The name sent a little spike of recognition through me. I realized I'd seen it on the broken gravestone, the one by the front fence. The top half that leaned forward had the Warren part clear enough, with the first initial chipped, but still readable if you caught it in the right light. I felt that same strange cold from the hallway, creeping up around my arms and across the back of my neck. Even though I was in the kitchen, the overhead light flickered once, just a quick stutter, and steadied. I told myself it was the old wiring. I put the papers back in the envelope and slid it into the box. Pushing it a little farther under the table, it felt like tucking something away so I didn't have to see it anymore. A couple of days later, I ran into Mrs. Keller again at the store. It was early evening, just after work. The sky outside the windows was that pale, washed-out color you get right before it goes dark. She rang up my groceries and made a little small talk about the weather. I don't know why I did it, but as she handed me my change, I asked, "Do you know anything about a grave in that cemetery across from my place? The stone's broken near the front. Last name Warren." She went still in this small, precise way, like someone hit pause on her. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the counter. "Why are you asking about that?" she said, not unkindly, but flatter. "I just noticed it," I said. "I saw someone standing there one night. Thought maybe it was a family plot or something." I was curious. She shook her head once, sharp. "Those graves aren't what you think they are," she said quietly. "Best thing is, you don't stare out that window too much." "What does that mean?" I asked. She picked up the next customer's items and started scanning them. "Have a good night, Mark," she said, like I'd already stepped away. Walking home, the phrase kept replaying in my head. Those graves aren't what you think they are. I tried to fit normal explanations around it. Old Potter's Field for unclaimed bodies, a section with some kind of legal issue where the paperwork got screwed up. Maybe the town had moved the fence at some point and decided to just pretend a few plots didn't count anymore. That kind of bureaucratic weirdness happens. That night, I sat in the living room with the TV on low, not really watching. The porch light clicked on by itself and threw the shadow of the fence bars onto our ceiling. The pattern looked almost like stripes, moving a little as the wind shook the trees. I got up and walked to the window. The gate across the street was standing open again, the dark gap, like a missing tooth. I could feel the cold spot before I even reached the glass, a soft wall of it against my chest. Outside, the cemetery looked empty. No one stood by the broken stone. The flowers were gone. The grass barely moved. Behind me, from the kitchen, I heard my name. Mark. It was that same not quite right version of my name, stretched just a little too long at the end. I turned, expecting to see Kyle in the doorway, even though I knew he was at work. The kitchen light was on, but the room was empty. The back door was closed. For a second, I thought I saw something in the reflection on the window beside me, a pale shape where no one should be, standing just over my shoulder. When I blinked, it was gone. It could have been a trick of the light, the TV screen, the porch bulb, all layered together. That's what I told myself anyway. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the survey map with the old boundary lines, the name written just inside where our front steps would be. I kept thinking about how people say across from the cemetery like there's a clear line, like here is us and there is them. But if the fence had moved, if the records were wrong, then maybe that line wasn't as solid as it looked from the sidewalk. I still live in that house. Moving would be expensive, and honestly, it's hard to explain any of this in a way that doesn't make me sound dramatic. Life goes on. I still wake up, drink my coffee, go to work, come home. Kyle still cracks the occasional joke about our ghost, though he does it less now, and he double-checks the deadbolt without thinking. Sometimes I catch him standing at the living room window at night, looking across at the stones with this thoughtful, uncomfortable expression. When he notices me watching, he shrugs and says he's just checking the weather. I don't push it. The motion light still comes on by itself. The cold spots haven't gone away. Every now and then, usually on damp evenings, when the wind is low and the insects go suddenly quiet, I'll hear the soft crunch of gravel outside, like footsteps stopping in front of our porch and not moving on. I stand there in the hallway, holding my breath, waiting for something more obvious to happen, for a knock on the door, a voice, anything. It never does. I tell myself there's always a reasonable explanation. Wiring, wind, old pipes. A map drawn by someone who made a mistake. A shadow that looks like a woman in white, only because that's what my brain expects to see. When I look out at a broken stone after dark, most nights, I believe that. I still keep the porch light on, facing the stones. My name's Daniel, and I'm from Duncannon, Pennsylvania. I've lived in the same small house on Sycamore Road for almost 6 years now. It's a one-story place. Old, but not in a charming way. It's just low and kind of square with aluminum siding that needs to be painted again. I split the mortgage with my older sister, Kelly. She moved in after her divorce, and we sort of fell into this quiet, shared routine without really planning it. We're not the kind of siblings who sit around talking about our feelings, but we get along. We share groceries, complain about the same neighbors, and text each other from different rooms. When we don't feel like yelling, directly across the street from our house is the cemetery. It's not huge or dramatic. No iron gates or statues or anything like that. Just a low stone wall, one gravel path that loops around, rows of tilted headstones that get a little more crowded and crooked toward the back. I think it's officially called Hillside Memorial, but everyone in town just says the Old Cemetery or the Hill. From our front porch, you can see almost the whole thing. The big maple tree near the center. The tiny brick maintenance shed, the older section where the stones are almost unreadable at first. It honestly just felt like a free view. No house across from us, no loud kids, no someone's truck parked in front of our driveway. Just open grass and trees. When we first moved in, people kept asking if it bothered us, and we'd laugh and say, "The neighbors are quiet," like we were the first ones to make that joke. Sometimes in the mornings, I drink my coffee on the steps and watch the fog sit low over the graves. It's more peaceful than it sounds. The way the fog moves, it makes the headstones look shorter, like they're sinking. Duncannon itself is small, if you don't already know it. We've got a gas station, a diner, a couple of bars, a Dollar General, and not a whole lot else. Old houses, old sidewalks, those half-broken curbs where the weeds just do whatever they want. Main Street kind of curves around and then just stops. The highway takes most of the traffic before it ever really gets to town. If you live here, you either grew up here or you got stuck here. I guess I'm a little bit of both. I work at the hardware store off Route 11. It's one of those places that's been there forever. Same squeaky front door, same coffee pot that always smells burned, no matter how fresh the coffee is. I open most mornings, get off around 4. Kelly works at the medical billing office in town, which sounds more important than it is, according to her. We pass each other in the driveway when she's heading out for her later shift, and I'm coming back. Nights, it's mostly me at home. I'll make something simple for dinner, leave her a plate in the fridge, and then sit on the couch, where if I turn my head just right, I can see the cemetery out the living room window. After a while, you stop noticing that you live across from a field of graves. It just becomes part of the background. We got used to people coming and going for funerals, the slow line of cars, the guy from the funeral home in his too big coat, the folding chairs set up under a tent when it rained. We got used to the groundskeeper driving his little tractor around, the sound of it puttering up and down the rows. One fall, Kelly and I even helped a couple of kids find a cool spooky stone for a school project. It all felt very normal. That's the part I always come back to when I think about everything that happened. It was normal for a long time. Most nights, I'd sit on the front steps after dinner. It became kind of a habit. I'd bring a beer or just stand there with my hands in my pockets and listen. You don't realize how loud the highway is until the wind shifts, and you suddenly can't hear it anymore. Then it's just dogs barking way off, the little clicking sound the insects make in the grass, and the rustle of leaves from the tree in the middle of the cemetery. Sometimes the porch light flickered, but it's old, and I kept meaning to change the fixture. The first weird thing, if you want to call it that, was the cemetery gate. It's a simple metal gate on a hinge, just wide enough for a maintenance truck to fit through. There's no lock, just a chain they loop over the post. I'd never paid much attention to it. But one week in late September, I started noticing it open in the mornings. Not wide, just swung enough that you could walk through. At first, I figured the groundskeeper forgot to close it. Or maybe they'd left it open for a delivery or something. But I kept seeing it like that slightly open right around dawn when I'd come out with my coffee. By lunchtime, it would be closed again. It wasn't a big thing. Just one of those small details you start to notice once you've run out of other things to think about. One evening, when I came home from work, I saw something else. A bouquet of flowers on one of the older graves near the front. Pale yellow flowers, probably grocery store ones, sitting in a glass jar like a repurposed pasta sauce container. The stone itself was so faded, I couldn't read the name from across the street. I hadn't seen anyone over there that day. It's not like the place gets a ton of visitors. Somebody's feeling sentimental, I said when I walked in. Who? Kelly asked from the kitchen. Someone left flowers on one of the old stones. The ones in the front row. Looks like a kid's grave or something. She shrugged. Maybe somebody finally died in this town and you didn't hear about it. Funny, you didn't think much of it. People bring flowers to cemeteries. That's the point. But the next morning, the flowers looked different, like they'd been rearranged. The jar was tilted a bit toward the gravel path instead of toward the road. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a raccoon, or just me misremembering the angle. It felt silly to stare at some stranger's flowers, so I stopped looking. A few nights after that, I was out on the porch later than usual. Kelly was at work, and it was one of those weirdly warm nights where the air doesn't move much. The porch light was doing its little flicker thing. Across the street, the cemetery was just dark shapes and that lighter patch of sky above the trees. I was about to go inside when I heard someone say my name. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It sounded like someone calling from down the street. That half-question way people say your name when they're not sure if it's you. Just, Dan? I turned, expecting to see one of the neighbors out with their dog, but the sidewalk was empty. There were lights on in a couple of houses, a TV flickering somewhere. Nothing unusual? Yeah, I said, because you feel stupid ignoring your own name. Nobody answered. The insects kept chirping. I waited a minute, then went back inside. I told myself it had been the TV or someone on the next block. You know how sound carries weird at night. I didn't mention it to Kelly. It didn't feel like a real thing, just a little glitch in the usual noise. But after that, I started hearing it more. Not every night. Just sometimes. When I was out there alone and the wind shifted a certain way. Dan. Always that same tone. Not shouting, just close enough, like someone about to ask you a favor, A couple of times I answered out loud. A couple of times I didn't. Either way, there was never a second call. The cemetery gate kept being open in the mornings. The flowers on that faded stone got replaced once, then twice. Different colors each time, always in that same jar. I never saw who did it. One Saturday, I went to the town office to get a copy of our property tax bill Kelly had lost. While I was there, I asked the clerk, this older guy named Ron, who'd been working there since forever, if there was any kind of map or record of the cemetery. It was just curiosity. Like, who's buried where? I asked. He paused with his hand on the printer tray and gave me this slow, sideways look. That old place? Yeah, hillside. Across from my house. Just wondered how far back it actually goes. Ron sighed, like I'd asked him to help me move a fridge. We've got some records, he said. They're not all in one piece. Some of the older ones got water damaged. We went into the back and came out with a worn binder and a slim cardboard box full of index cards. He set them on the counter between us and flipped through a few pages, without really letting me see. Looking for someone specific? He asked. Not really. There's this stone right in front, left of the gate. I can't read the name from my porch. Just curious who it is. He frowned a little, like that information should be obvious to me. You can't just walk over and read it? Yeah, I mean, I could. I was just wondering about, how old that section is. He flipped a few more pages, then closed the binder instead of answering. Those records are incomplete, he said finally. Old mistakes. They didn't always log things the way they were supposed to. If you're not looking for a relative, I wouldn't worry about it. The way he said that made me want to ask more, but there was a line forming behind me, and I didn't feel like being the guy who turned the tax office into story hour. So I thanked him, took my copy, and left. That night, I told Kelly about it while she was leaning on the counter eating leftover pizza. So the town's hiding their big cemetery secret, she said with her mouth half full. Maybe they buried Jimmy Hoffa under your car. Yeah, thanks, I said. You're very helpful. She smirked. Hey, at least if it's haunted, they're polite about it. Nobody's banging on the windows. I didn't say anything about haunted. You didn't have to. You've been staring out that window like you're waiting for something. I just noticed stuff. That's all. Well, don't start hearing voices, she said. I can't afford the place by myself. I almost told her about hearing my name, but I stopped. It sounded dumb in my head, and I could already hear her joking about it. A couple of weeks later, my cousin Mark came to visit. We're close in age, but he lives out in Ohio, and I don't see him much. He'd taken a few days off work and decided to do a little road trip, which basically meant hanging out in my living room and making fun of our local pizza. On his second night there, he stood at the front window with a beer in his hand, looking out at the cemetery. Man, he said, you didn't tell me you live in a horror movie? It's not that dramatic, I said. It's just grass and stones. Sure, until something crawls out of it. He grinned. We should camp out there in the cemetery. Not in it, like right next to it. Backyard camping? I brought my tent, remember? We can set up by the fence line. You, me, and the dead. You're an idiot, I said, but it did sound kind of fun in a stupid way. I hadn't gone camping in years. When I mentioned it to Kelly, she just shook her head. You two are children, she said. If the cops get called because you're creeping around the cemetery at midnight, I'm not bailing you out. You're staying on our side of the road, I said. Relax. Whatever. Don't tear up the yard. And if something drags you away, I'm selling your PlayStation. We picked a Friday night since I didn't have to work the next day. Around 9, Mark and I set up his small 2-person tent in the backyard. Near the low chain-link fence that separated our property from the narrow strip of brush, then the road, then the stone wall of the cemetery. It wasn't exactly wilderness. The air felt different out there in the dark. Cooler. The sounds of the highway were softer, and the cricket noise seemed louder. We brought out a couple of lawn chairs, a flashlight, and a cooler. Kelly stayed inside, occasionally texting us dumb messages like, "Enjoy being murdered by raccoons." From where we sat, we could see the cemetery gate straight ahead and the big maple tree just beyond it, rising up darker against the sky. The porch light glowed over our shoulders, flickering every now and then. Okay. This is actually kind of creepy, Mark said eventually. I like it. It's fine, I said. But I kept glancing at the tree. The way the streetlight down at the corner hit it, it threw this long shadow across the grass and over the gravel path. You don't really think about how tall a tree is until you're staring at the shape it makes at some point. The insects quieted down all at once. It happens sometimes. There'll be this sudden pause where the noise drops out like someone hit a switch. Mark noticed it too. Nature just muted itself, he said. That's not weird at all. It comes back, I said. They do that. Sure, he said. They just needed a break from singing the song of our doom. He was joking, but I could feel the hair on my arms standing up. The air felt thicker, like when a storm's about to roll in, except the sky was clear. It was Mark who saw it first. Hey, he said quietly. Do you see that? Behind the tree? I followed his gaze. At first, it just looked like more shadow. The tree's trunk, the spread of its branches, the uneven line where the grass met the gravel. But after a second, I saw what he meant. There was a darker shape, just off to the right side of the trunk. Tall, narrow, too straight to be a branch. It almost looked like someone standing there, pressed up close to the tree, trying to stay hidden. It's just the tree, I said automatically, or the shed behind it. The light's hitting it weird. There's no shed behind that tree, dude. The shed's over there. He pointed farther back and left, where the low brick building sat, barely visible. Look how it moves when we move. I shifted in my chair, leaning a little to the left, then to the right. The shadow behind the tree seemed to slide just a little too, like it was adjusting its angle. Following us, it's probably just the streetlight in our heads, I said. You're making it into something. Okay, fun science experiment, Mark said. Turn your head that way and don't move. I'm gonna walk. He stood up and walked a few steps across the yard. The darker shape seemed to lean very slightly, like someone peeking around a corner. I felt this cold feeling start in my stomach. Stop, I said. You're freaking yourself out. Or something's freaking us out, he said. His voice was still light, but he wasn't grinning anymore. Get the flashlight. I picked up the flashlight from between our chairs, clicked it on, and pointed it at the tree. The beam cut across the road, flashed off the low wall, and lit the trunk in a dull, washed-out cone. The branches threw jagged shapes against the grass. For a second, the darker shape behind it stayed put. Then it moved. I don't know how else to describe it. It didn't step out or anything. It was more like the shadows stretched, lifted, and rushed forward all at once, swallowing its own edges, crossing the path and the road in this single, jerky slide. It came toward us, and then it was gone, like it had snapped out of existence just before it hit the fence at the same time. The porch motion like this separate, smaller fixture we'd installed near the back door clicked on behind us. The sudden extra light made everything jump into sharper focus. The chain link fence, the road, the wall, the tree, all perfectly normal. No one there. Jesus Christ, Mark said, dropping back into his chair. Did you see that? Tell me you saw that. I'm not letting my brain do that alone. I saw. Something, I said. My mouth felt dry. I kept the flashlight pointed at the tree, even though I couldn't see anything that wasn't supposed to be there. It was probably just the beam shifting, or a car going by, or... There was no car, he said, and shadows don't rush toward you, like they're late for work. That thing moved. We're tired, I said. It's dark. Our eyes are doing that thing. It's just a trick. He laughed once, sharp. Okay, man, sure. Trick of the light. Great trick. We sat there for a few more minutes, both of us pretending to be more relaxed than we were. The insects started up again, slowly at first and then all at once. The air felt less heavy. Eventually, Mark exhaled and shook his head. I'm going inside, he said. I'm suddenly aware that I enjoy walls, I said. Yeah, okay. We left the tent up, but took the cooler and chairs inside. As we passed the back door, I noticed muddy prints on the concrete step. Just a couple of them, like someone had stood there with wet shoes. I almost pointed them out to Mark, but I stopped. We'd walked around the yard setting things up. We could have tracked something ourselves. Inside, with the TV on and the kitchen light bright and yellow, the whole thing already felt less real. When we tried to describe it to Kelly, we kept interrupting each other, arguing over small details: how tall the shadow seemed, how fast it moved, whether it leaned or slid. She rolled her eyes. "You two are idiots," she said. "It was probably your own shadows. Or like a raccoon. Or your imagination's teaming up to kill me with boredom." "Raccoons don't make vertical shadows the height of the tree," Mark said. "Maybe it was a very ambitious raccoon." We laughed, because that's what you do. But later, lying in bed, I kept replaying the moment when the thing rushed forward and disappeared. I tried to force it into some logical explanation, a trick of perspective. A car's headlights that I just hadn't noticed, but every version I came up with felt flimsy. The next morning, Mark and I went out to take down the tent. The grass was damp, and the sky had that flat, pale look it gets before the sun really decides what it's going to do. I noticed them right away, a line of muddy prints leading from the road, across the strip of brush, up to our fence. They weren't clear footprints, more like smudges where something damp had pressed into the grass and dirt, then onto the concrete near the gate in the fence. They stopped right at our side. Nothing inside the yard. Nothing on our patio. Just up to the line, and no farther. Mark crouched down and squinted at them. "You seeing this? Probably kids messing around," I said. "Shortcut from somewhere. Or a dog. Dogs don't wear shoes," he said. "And that's a shoe print, kinda." I didn't answer. I didn't want to stare too long at something I could still almost explain after he left that weekend. The house felt a little emptier. Kelly went back to her late shifts. I went back to opening the store. The days slid by, but the feeling didn't really go away. Every time I looked out the window at the tree, I remembered that sliding rush of shadow. Small things started happening around the house. The back door would be unlatched in the mornings. Not wide open or anything, just that little click undone, the door leaning softly against the frame instead of pulled tight. I blamed myself. Maybe I hadn't shut it all the way after taking out the trash. Maybe Kelly had gone out for a smoke and forgotten once. I came home and found my work keys sitting on the kitchen table instead of hanging on the hook by the door, where I always leave them. Kelly swore she hadn't touched them. "You probably just dropped them," she said. "You've been spacey lately," I said. "I guess." Sometimes, when I was in the shower, I'd hear the muffled sound of the front door opening. Not slamming, just that dull thump and squeak. I'd shut off the water and stand there listening, waiting for footsteps, for Kelly's voice. Kel. I'd call nothing when I stepped out and checked. The door would be closed, locked. Everything normal. I kept telling myself these were just quirks of an old house, drafts, loose latches. The usual, I used that word a lot in my head, usual. Like if I said it enough, the unusual things would shrink back into it. One night, I want 11, I was lying on the couch half asleep with the TV on low. Kelly was at work. I heard her voice from the hallway. "Dan." It was clear as anything. Not the distant, uncertain Dan. From outside, but right there, just past the living room doorway. She sounded a little out of breath, like she'd come in fast. "Yeah," I said, sitting up. "In here." No answer. I muted the TV. The house went very quiet. I waited, expecting her to pop her head around the corner and make some joke, but nothing happened. Eventually, I got up and checked the hall. The front door was locked. The kitchen was empty. Her keys weren't on the hook. I checked my phone. There was a text from her, sent 3 minutes earlier. "Running late, might have to stay over for overtime if they ask. Don't wait up." I stood there in the hallway with my phone in my hand, trying not to think too much. The sound had been so normal. Not spooky or echoing or anything, just my sister saying my name. For the first time, I didn't go out on the porch that night. I stayed inside, all the lights on, flipping channels until my eyes blurred. A few days later, I finally walked across the street to look at the old stone with the flowers. I don't know why I hadn't done it earlier. Some part of me liked it better from a distance. I guess. The ground in that front row dips a little, so you have to step down off the gravel path. The grass was damp, and smelled like dirt and leaves. Up close, the stone was thinner than I'd thought, almost like a slate marker. The name was faint, but still readable if you squinted. Elias Mercer. 1879, 1913, there were no other details. No beloved father or anything like that. Just the name and dates. The jar of flowers was there again, this time with small white ones, maybe baby's breath. They looked fresh, not wilted at all. There was something about the name that tugged at me until it clicked. Later that afternoon, I dug through the drawer where we keep all the Random House papers' old warranties. Paint receipts, closing documents from when we bought the place together. In the middle of a stapled packet about property lines and easements, found it. The name Elias Mercer was typed in the section about previous owners. Same spelling. Same name as the stone. Next to it was a date, property transfer. 1915. 2 years after the death date on the grave, I stared at the dates longer than I needed to. There were a lot of possible explanations. Maybe he'd owned the land before he died, and the transfer was just the legal stuff catching up. Maybe it had passed through his estate. I don't know. There was probably some boring technical reason. Still, the combination of his name on the paper and his name on the stone, right there where I looked at it every day, made my chest feel tight. I went out to get the mail that evening and ran into Mrs. Abbott, our neighbor 2 houses down. She's in her 70s, one of those people who knows everyone's business without leaving her porch. She saw the paper in my hand and nodded toward the cemetery. Still nosing around about that old place? She asked. I hadn't realized she knew I'd gone to the town office. Word gets around, I guess. Just curious, I said. Found out one of the old owners is buried there? Or I think he is. Name matches. She pursed her lips. They don't always get those things lined up right, she said. Back then, they didn't keep records the way they should have. Yeah, that's what Ron said. I hesitated. Do you know anything about him? Elias Mercer. She shifted her weight, the mail tucked under her arm. I know enough to mind my own business, she said. And if you're smart, you'll do the same. It wasn't a threat. It sounded more like advice she'd rehearsed. It's like something she'd been told once and decided to pass on. I'm just trying to understand why his name is on my deed, I said. And his grave is right there, like he's still watching the place. Mrs. Abbott glanced past me at the house, then at the cemetery. Her eyes lingered on the big tree for a second. Those graves aren't what you think they are, she said quietly. Not all of them. Some of them are in the wrong places. Some of them are just markers without much under them. You live here long enough, you hear stories. What kind of stories? The wind picked up, moving her gray hair around her face. She shook her head. Doesn't matter, she said. You sleep across from them. That's close enough. No use digging things up, if you follow me. She started to walk away, then stopped and looked back over her shoulder. Get a better light on that porch, she added. Feels less lonely that way. That night, I stood at the window and watched the tree again. The porch light flickered, then steadied, as if it had hurt her. The gate was closed. The cemetery looked exactly the way it always did. I thought about the voice saying my name. The shadow behind the tree rushing forward and vanishing. The muddy prints stopping at our fence. The way the air went cold in the living room before the back door latch would be found open the next morning. There are logical explanations for all of it. Old wiring, loose hinges, overactive imagination. The human brain is good at patterns, even when there aren't any. I tell myself that all the time, but sometimes late. When the town gets that hollow quiet and the insects pause, I still hear my name called from somewhere between the tree and the front door. Not loud, just that steady, patient question, Dan. Most nights, I don't answer. I just stand there with my hand on the light switch, watching the dark space between the stones, waiting for something I can explain, and never quite getting it. I still keep the porch light on, facing the cemetery. My name is Daniel, and I'm from Lewisburg. PNNSYLVANIAI. I rent a small 2-story house on a quiet street at the edge of town. If you stand on my front porch and lean on the railing, you look straight across the road at the cemetery. It's not big. Maybe a couple hundred stones. Some of them tilt a little. A lot of them are gray and soft around the edges, like chalk that got rained on for 100 years. I've lived here for 3 years now, and most days I don't even really notice it. It's just part of the view, like the grocery store parking lot or the river bridge. I live with my friend Mark. We went to college together and somehow never got around to not living together after. He works nights at the hospital. I work days at a hardware store off the main road. We're both pretty boring. We play video games, drink cheap beer, argue about whether the Eagles are cursed. That's about it. He likes to joke that the rent is cheap because of the front row seats to the boneyard. That's what he calls it. The Boney. My routine is simple. I open the store most mornings at 8. I bike there if the weather's decent, drive if it's sleeting or stupid cold. After work, I come home, cook something basic, maybe sit on the porch for a bit if the air's not heavy. The cemetery is right across the street, separated by a cracked strip of road and a thin line of grass. There's a short stone wall waist high, and a metal gate in the middle that squeaks when people push it open. The gate never really bothered me. Sometimes high school kids cut through there, or an older couple does their evening walk among the stones. When I first moved in, my mom asked if it freaked me out. Sleeping right across from a cemetery? I told her no. People in there are quieter than the ones in apartment buildings. That's what I said, and it was true. At first, it was just peaceful. There's this big maple tree near the center of the cemetery, and in fall the leaves turn bright and then drift down over the stones. Sometimes in summer, I'd sit on the porch with a beer and just watch the fireflies thread themselves between the markers. Lewisburg itself is just one of those towns that seems stuck halfway between old and not quite modern. The houses are a little crooked, but taken care of. There's one main street with a diner, a pharmacy, a thrift store, and a small grocery where everyone talks too long in the aisles. In the evenings, you can hear kids yelling a few blocks away, and somebody's dog barking and the railroad tracks humming farther out. Nothing dramatic. Just background noise. The cemetery fit into that. Old, small, a little overgrown in the back, where the groundskeeper's mower doesn't quite reach. Some days you smell cut grass and gas from his little tractor. Other days it's wet dirt and leaves after a rain. The wind runs through the trees and rattles the plastic flowers people stick into those green metal cones. It's quiet, but it's not dead, if that makes sense. It's just another part of town. Mark made way more jokes about it than I did. When we were moving in, he stood on the porch with a box of dishes and said, "If we ever get robbed, at least we know where the backup residents are." Stuff like that. He'd wave at the stones when we left for work. Once he stood at the front window and said, "Man, if anything weird is going to happen, it's going to happen right there," and pointed at the gate. But he always laughed when he said it, so it felt harmless for a while. Nothing weird happened at all. The first thing I noticed was the gate. It was late March. Still cold enough that you could see your breath if you exhaled hard. I was locking up the store, and the wind outside was sharp and fast, so I hurried to my car. When I pulled up to the house, the cemetery gate was wide open. That wasn't strange by itself. People used it all the time, but there was nobody there. No cars, no dog walkers, no one on the sidewalk. I didn't think much of it. I went inside, dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, and grabbed a soda from the fridge. When I came back to the front window a few minutes later, the gate was closed. I didn't see anyone touch it. I remember thinking maybe the wind did it, though the gate's heavy and likes to stick in the winter. I shrugged it off. Over the next couple of weeks, I started noticing it more. I get home around 6 most days. More often than not, I'd pull into the driveway and see the gate hanging open. By the time I'd emptied my pockets and wandered back to the front window, it'd be closed again. A few times I actually stood there and watched for someone to come out and shut it, figuring I'd just missed them all the other days. But nobody did. One second it was open, I'd turn away to hang up my coat or put down the mail, and the next second it wasn't. I told myself it was the wind. Or maybe there was a spring mechanism I hadn't noticed. When I walked over there one Sunday afternoon, though, I tried it. The gate squeaked when I pulled it open. It didn't swing freely. I let it go, and waited. It just hung there, slightly open, like it didn't want to commit. I had to give it another push to close it again. That same week, Mark started commenting on the flowers. "People are really leaning into the whole eternal remembrance thing," said one night, standing at the kitchen sink. He could see part of the cemetery through the window over the sink. "I swear those graves in the back didn't have flowers yesterday." I came over and looked. 3 small headstones near the far right side had matching white flowers in front of them. Real ones, not the plastic kind. The stems were fresh and green, and the petals looked perfect. The kind you'd expect on a wedding table, not out here. Maybe you just didn't notice. I said, "Maybe," he said, but his voice sounded doubtful. "Or maybe we got a very stealthy florist in town." A few days later, I noticed more. I was getting into my car in the morning, and the air had that damp chill that sticks to your clothes. The grass across the road glistened from overnight frost. There, on one of the older graves near the tree, were red roses. 6 of them, all in a little glass jar. The stone was so worn, I could barely read the name. The death date looked like it ended in 89, but the rest was gone. The roses were bright and stiff, like they had been put there that morning. There weren't any footprints leading to or from that spot, just the slightly darker marks where the frost had melted around the grave. I checked the time and told myself someone must have come by earlier, maybe while I was showering. People grieve in weird cycles. Maybe it just looked strange because of the frost. I got in my car and drove to work, trying to let it go. Small things kept stacking up like that. The motion light over our front porch started going off more often at night. It used to be just raccoons or the occasional neighbor cutting across the yard. Lately it would flare on when nothing was there. I'd peek through the curtain and see the empty porch, the pale light hitting the stone wall in the first row of graves. The rest of the cemetery would be dark behind them, trees black against the sky. Sensors probably going bad, I told Mark. We've had it a while. He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. Or they're finally coming to check out the neighbors, he said, and smiled without really smiling. Once or twice. When the wind came hard from the east, I thought I heard something under it. That's the best way I can say it. Not instead of the wind.
Under it.
I'd sit in the living room, TV on low, and hear this thin sound, like someone talking from far away through cupped hands. Not words I could make out, just a shape of sound. I'd pause the TV and sit there, listening, and then it'd be gone. And I'd tell myself it was just the air pushing through the gaps in the old windows. Old houses have a lot of opinions. They creak and sigh and complain. I didn't say anything. About that to Mark, it felt dumb to bring it up. He was the one who brought up the idea of recording stuff, Mark. Watches a lot of paranormal shows when he can't sleep after night shifts. He knows they're mostly nonsense, but they entertain him. One Friday, he had the weekend off, and we were sitting on the porch with a couple beers. The sun had already dropped behind the trees, and the sky was that flat blue-gray you get right before it goes black. The porch light kept flicking on and off, even though we were sitting still. You know what this reminds me of? He said those ghost hunter shows, the ones where they hang out in basements and listen for whispers. Yeah, I said. We could do it, he said, just for fun. I've got that little digital recorder from nursing school.
The one I use for lectures.
We could go across, walk around and see if we pick up anything. I rolled my eyes. Come on, what? Tell me you're not curious, he said. Besides, if we find nothing, we can finally shut up about the gate and the flowers and the light, and just blame everything on faulty wiring and bored teenagers. He wasn't wrong. At that point, all the little things had formed this sort of low buzz in the back of my mind. Nothing big enough to point at. Just a buzz. I finished my beer, set the can down, and said, Fine, but if we get arrested for trespassing, you're explaining this to my boss. We went inside so he could grab the recorder. It was one of those small silver ones, about the size of a pack of gum. It's cretched up. He checked the battery, hit a couple buttons, and we headed back out. The porch light came on as we opened the door, humming a little. It was quiet outside. It's a kind of quiet where you can hear your own jacket rubbing when you move. Somewhere far away, a dog barked twice and then stopped. The air had that cold metallic smell it gets before a frost. Gravel crunched under our shoes as we crossed the road. The cemetery gate squeaked when Mark pushed it open. He stepped through, and he let it swing shut behind us. It clanged softly, and then settled. The ground inside felt softer, the grass a little taller than on the roadside. The stones were darker now, just outlines against the dim sky. "Okay," Mark said, flipping on the recorder. A small red light came on. "This is stupid, just so we're clear." "Extremely stupid," I said. We walked slowly along the main path. Our breath showed in front of us, in faint puffs. Wind moved the bare branches, and every now and then a twig snapped under our feet. Mark held the recorder out in front of him like a microphone. "If anyone here wants to say anything," he said, and his voice sounded embarrassed. You can talk into this, I guess." I snorted. Real professional. "I'm not doing the cable TV narrator voice," he said. "You get what you get." We walked like that for maybe 10 minutes. We stopped near the big maple tree. A few old stones around it leaned hard, names nearly gone. I looked down at one small marker close to my shoes. It was simple, just a first name and 2 dates. The dates were close together, less than a year apart. I realized it was a child's grave. The grass in front of it looked trodden down, like someone had knelt there a lot. A flicker of something went through me, but I pushed it away. Kids died back then. They used to get sick from things we fix with pills now. It was sad, but it was also just how it was. Mark didn't say anything for a moment, then he cleared his throat. "If this is your spot," he said quietly, like he didn't want to wake anybody. We're just walking through. We don't mean anything, just neighbors." The wind moved through the branches above us, making a soft rushing sound. The porch light across the street flicked off, then back on again, throwing a pale rectangle out over the road and up to the stone wall. "Okay, this is officially weird enough," I said. "I'm cold." "Yeah," he said. "Let's go listen to nothing." We went back to the house. The gate stuck a little on the way out. I had to put my shoulder into it to get it to close. Inside, Mark plugged the recorder into his laptop at the kitchen table. I made coffee, mostly just to have something warm to hold. The house felt normal, the hum of the fridge, the faint ticking of the heating system. The kind of noise you stop hearing after a while until you listen for it. He loaded up the audio file, dragged the slider to the beginning, and hit play. For the first few minutes, it was just us. Our footsteps, our dumb comments, the squeak of the gate, wind, a couple of distant car sounds. I leaned against the counter and listened, waiting for the punchline. Then we got to the part near the tree. I heard Mark's voice on the recording. "If this is your spot, we're just walking through. We don't mean anything, just neighbors." After that, there was a stretch of silence. Wind, faint, like someone breathing into a pillow. Then another sound started to come through. It was soft. First I thought it was just the wind catching the microphone in a different way, but it didn't quite match the gusts. It had a rise and fall to it, a pattern. It sounded like someone trying not to cry out loud. That stuttering inhale you hear from kids when they've worn themselves out crying but can't stop. Mark paused the playback, then scrubbed back a few seconds and hit play again. We both stayed quiet. The sound grew clearer the more I focused on it. Light, thin, somewhere in the background. Not close to the recorder, but not miles away either. Just near. "That's just wind," I said. But it came out more like a question. He didn't answer. He backed it up again and turned the volume up a bit. This time, on top of the soft sobbing rhythm, I heard a tiny voice. It was faint, like it was being dragged through water. 2 or 3 words squeezed out between those shaky breaths. "Don't leave me." It was so quiet that if you weren't really listening, you'd miss it. The last word dragged a little, the way little kids do when they're tired and clinging. My first thought was that someone was messing with us, that one of the neighbor's kids had been hiding behind a stone. But the sound didn't quite fit that either. It didn't sound like it was in the open air. It had this closed-in quality, like it was inside something. Echoing a little dot, Mark hit pause. The kitchen clock ticked. My coffee sat there cooling. "Okay," he said finally. "Tell me that's nothing." "It's nothing," I said automatically, but my mouth felt dry. "Could be a radio? Somebody's phone? Those things pick up interference, you know that? Could be something from when you used it before." I wiped it last month, he said. I cleared all the lecture stuff. It was empty. Then it's the wind, I said. You ever hear how they say, if you listen hard enough, you can hear whatever you want in static? They've done studies on it. People hear patterns. Brains hate random noise. You scan for meaning, and eventually you find it. Yeah, he said, but he didn't sound convinced. Maybe. We played it again, and the little voice was still there. Same timing, same cracked, don't leave me. It felt less like hearing something new and more like hearing something that had always been there, and now I couldn't unnotice it. We didn't talk much that night after that. Mark saved the file, closed the laptop, and said he was going to bed. I rinsed my mug and stood for a minute at the sink, staring out at the cemetery. The porch light had gone off again. The stones were just darker shapes against the dark ground. I told myself if I went out there right then, I'd find some totally normal explanation. A speaker someone left on. A baby monitor glitch. Kid hiding behind the tree, even though that didn't make any sense. But I didn't go. I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. Over the next week, little things started to feel more connected, even though I didn't want them to. The porch light got more sensitive, or at least that's what I called it in my head. It would click on at 2 or 3 in the morning, throwing its pale circle out toward the stones. I'd wake up, see that thin band of light under my bedroom door, and lie there staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps in the hallway. I never heard any. Sometimes I'd hear that almost voice again when the wind picked up outside. Not a full phrase, just that same pattern of broken breaths. I'm sure some of that was in my head. Once you get a sound stuck in there, you can find it anywhere. One afternoon, I stopped by the clerk's desk at the little town hall, I told myself. I needed to check on property tax stuff, which was half true. While I was there, I asked about the cemetery. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with glasses on a chain, looked up at me over her paperwork. Why? She asked. Just curious, I said. Live across from it. Wondered how old it is. Who owns it and all that? She frowned a little, then turned to a shelf behind her and pulled down a thin binder. She flipped through the pages, scanning. Records say it's been there since at least 1890, she said. Family plots first, then town took it over. Why are you having trouble with kids going in there at night? No, I said. Nothing like that, it's quiet. Just, we noticed some fresh flowers on some of the older graves. Thought maybe there was an event we missed. Her mouth tightened briefly, like she'd almost said something else. People visit when they visit, she said. Courts don't track that. Right, I said. Any idea about the little gravestones near the big maple? The ones with just first names and dates? She closed the binder. Those are old, she said. Back when people didn't always have money for proper stones. A lot of epidemics back then. Diphtheria, scarlet fever. Kids got hit the worst, so they were from around here. I asked, she hesitated. Not always, she said. Sometimes the county took people in, orphans, the poorhouse, that kind of thing. They'd bury them out there if there was no family. You have records on them? I said. She shook her head. Some, not all. Paperwork wasn't great. Look, if you want to research local history, the library has a section. Her tone had shifted. Not rude, exactly. Just closed. I felt like I'd walked into a room I wasn't supposed to see. As I turned to go, she added, those graves aren't what you think they are. I stopped. What does that mean? She shuffled some papers. I mean, they're not like the new ones. You can't trace them the same way. Records are spotty. Don't go digging around out there in the dark is all I'm saying. People get ideas. I'm not planning on digging anything, I said. Good, she said, without looking up. That night, Mark came home from a late shift, looking exhausted. We were both in the kitchen again when he said, You want to hear something weirder? No, I said, but he kept going. I was at the nurse's station around 3, he said. Everything was quiet. I pulled up that audio file to show Amanda, the tech with the podcasts. Anyway, I played it through my headphones, and when it got to that part, the kid's voice, it sounded clearer. Clearer how? Like closer, he said. I swear it sounded like, don't leave me here. Like there was another word. But when I played it again, it went back to how it was. Just don't leave me, I I checked the waveforms. Nothing changed. Didn't want to think about that. You were exhausted, I said. You misheard it. Plus, those hospital headphones are trash. He gave me a tired smile. Yeah, probably. We didn't play the file again for a while after that. The line between the cemetery and the house started to feel thinner, even if I didn't say it out loud. Small stuff around the house shifted. I'd leave my keys on the kitchen table, come back, and find them on the counter by the sink. Mark would swear he left his charger on the coffee table, and then find it on the back of the couch. Nothing huge. Nothing that couldn't be basic fourness. One afternoon, I came home to find muddy footprints in the front hallway. Small ones. Too small for either of us. They started just inside the front door, like someone had stepped in from outside. Then stopped halfway to the stairs and faded. There was no trail leading up to the porch. The mat outside was clean and dry. I stood there for a long minute, holding the door open, feeling the cold air pool around my ankles. Finally, I grabbed some paper towels and wiped the prints up. The mud smeared easily, not even fully dry yet. I told myself Mark had a smaller patient sibling clinging to his shoes somehow. That didn't even make sense. But it was better than the first thought that came to my mind. That night, I checked the deadbolt on the door twice before going to bed. The first time I heard the voice inside the house. I thought it was the TV. Mark was on night shift, and I was alone. I'd fallen asleep on the couch, with some random sitcom playing. I woke up because the room was colder than it should have been. The TV was still on, low, showing some rerun with people laughing too brightly. The porch light was shining through the curtains, buzzing faintly. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Then I heard a small voice call out, very clearly, "Mom?" I sat up straight. The voice wasn't loud. It sounded like a kid who woke up from a nap and wasn't sure where everyone went. "Hello?" I said, immediately feeling stupid for talking to nothing. There was no answer. I muted the TV and listened. The house ticked and settled. No more footsteps. No more voice. I told myself it had come from the TV before I muted it. My brain just lagged behind. That was the only explanation that made any sense. I got up, checked the front door, and then, after a long pause, went upstairs and checked the rooms. My bedroom was the same mess. Mark's room was dark and empty, bed unmade from the morning. The bathroom light was off, the door half closed. The temperature upstairs was fine. Not cold like downstairs had been. I went back down and turned up the thermostat a couple degrees. After that, small things started happening, just enough to keep my nerves humming. The bathroom door would be half open when I knew I'd left it closed. The TV remote showed up on the floor instead of the couch. One evening, I came home and found the porch light turned off at the switch, something we almost never did, because the sensor handled it. I kept asking myself if I was just looking for patterns now. Once you think something might be off, every little thing starts to feel like part of it. About a month after we recorded in the cemetery, I was digging through a cardboard box in the attic, looking for the warranty on our old washer. The attic in that house was low and cramped, with insulation puffing out in places and boards laid down in a narrow path. It smelled like dry dust and old wood. I found a folder labeled closing docs from when the landlord bought the place. I wasn't really supposed to have it. It had been left in a cabinet years ago, and I never handed it back. I flipped through it, looking for anything related to repairs. When a thin envelope slipped out and landed on the floor, inside were a few old photocopies. One of them looked like a blurred page from some early town ledger. Names and dates, half readable. At the top, handwritten in pen, someone had circled a name and written parcel included. The name matched the first name on the small gravestone by the tree. Same spelling, same year. Underneath, in a different handwriting, someone had scrawled, "Child died on premises. Transferred to county. Burial across road." I sat back on my heels, the board under me creaking. The attic felt suddenly smaller. There was nothing supernatural written there. No curses, no warnings. Just a simple line that connected the house and that grave in a way I hadn't realized before. Whoever that kid was. They lived in this house, or on this property. Before it was chopped up and rented out, I brought the paper downstairs and showed it to Mark later, so he said slowly, "Our place was a county home at some point." "Looks like it," I said. My voice sounded flat. "Kid got sick. Died here. Buried over there." Turned the paper around, reading the notes again. "That lines up with what the clerk said," he murmured. "About the orphans. The poorhouse." "It doesn't mean anything," I said. "It's just history. Every old house has some story like this hidden in a box. We just happen to know this one." He looked up at me. "And the recording?" "Audio pareidolia," I said. I clung to that word like it could anchor everything. Brains filling in gaps. "We go looking for a ghost. We hear one. That's how it works." He nodded, but his eyes drifted toward the window, where the porch light had just flicked on by itself. We didn't argue about it. There wasn't anything to argue about, really. There was just a thin line of facts, and then there was how it all felt. We still have the recording. It's on Mark's laptop, and also on a backup drive, because he says it's interesting data. We almost never play it now. Every time we do, that small, shaky "don't leave me" is there, exactly the same. It doesn't get louder or clearer. It doesn't add words. It just stays. Sometimes I wonder if we caught something that was already fading. Not a ghost or anything dramatic. Just the shape of a feeling that stuck to a place. A kind of leftover wanting. Or maybe it's just wind, and our brains insist on putting a child's voice on it, because we saw the date on that stone. Either way, I leave the porch light on now. I tell myself it's for safety. We're on the edge of town. A light by the door makes sense. That's the reasonable thing. That's the explanation I give people when they ask why it's always on, even in the middle of the night, pointing straight out at the low stone wall and the first row of graves. The house still settles. The wind still pushes through the trees and rattles the windows. Once in a while, I hear what sounds like footsteps on the stairs when Mark's at work, and I remind myself that the pipes are old and the wood flexes with the temperature. I hold on to that explanation like a rail. On some nights, though, out. When the air feels colder inside than it should, and the insects outside go quiet all at once, I stand at the front window and look across the road. The gate is usually closed. Sometimes it's open. I don't check twice anymore. I don't play the recording. I don't need to. The words live in my head now, soft and shaky, caught forever under that stretch of wind. I still keep the porch light on, facing the stones. My name is Aaron, and I'm from Easton, Pennsylvania. I rent half of a small gray house on a hill at the edge of town. If you stand at our front window and look across the narrow road, you see the cemetery right away. The stone wall, the iron gate, then rows of old markers going up and down a slope. And, a little off to the right, the angel statue. People who visit always notice her. We usually just call it her, like she's a neighbor. I live there with my roommate, Kyle. He works at the grocery store off Route 248, mostly evenings. I work nights as the security guy for that cemetery. Grounds attendant on paper, but it's basically a guard with a flashlight and a checklist. It sounds creepy, but honestly it's just a job. Someone drives through once in a while, and kids hop the wall sometimes. But most nights, it's just me, the wind, and the stones. Our days are simple. Kyle gets up late, makes too much coffee, and leaves his mugs everywhere. I sleep in until early afternoon because of the night shift. I grab a shower, scroll my phone, maybe run an errand or two. We usually overlap in the evenings around 6 or 7. One of us cooks something basic: pasta, eggs, frozen pizza, and the other does dishes. Then he heads to the store. And I pull on my heavy work boots and jacket and cross the road to clock in. The cemetery never bothered me at first. If anything, it was kind of peaceful. It's small and old, tucked between the hill and a stand of maples and oaks. Some stones lean. Some names are worn smooth. There's a gravel loop road that winds through, just wide enough for one car. In summer, the air smells like cut grass and soil. In fall, it smells like wet leaves and a little bit of cold stone. The traffic noise drops off up there. You hear more crickets than cars. From our house, the angel sits just within view. She's about 6 feet tall, on a low pedestal, wings folded in, head slightly bowed, hands clasped around what might be a wreath or a bundle of flowers. The detail is kind of worn. She used to just be part of the background for me. I'd be washing dishes or eating cereal, glance up, and see her behind my own reflection in the glass. Porch light in front, cemetery behind. Normal. Easton itself is not exactly a big city. Once you get off the main roads, it feels small. Old brick houses, narrow streets, those little corner bars that never really close. Our part of town is quieter. A couple of duplexes, some single-family houses with porch swings. Half the people have lived there for decades, and the other half are renters like us, cycling in and out. There are dogs that bark whenever someone walks by, mailboxes that lean, porch lights that buzz and flicker when it's damp. My routine is steady. I leave the house around 8:45 p.m., cross the road, punch in at the small office just inside the gate, pick up my flashlight and log sheet. I do a first loop while there's still a bit of light left, just to see if anything looks off. After that, every hour or so, I walk the path again. Gravel under my boots, my breath visible in colder months, the wind moving through the trees. It's quiet work. You either get comfortable with that kind of quiet, or you quit. For me, it was just background noise for a long time. The first odd thing, if you want to call it that, was the gate. One morning, I finished my last walk of the night, logged everything as normal, locked up the little office, crossed home as the sky was going gray. The gate was shut and latched when I left. I remember the metal groan when I closed it. A couple hours later, when Kyle and I stepped outside to head to Wawa, the gate was standing open. Not all the way, just swung halfway toward the road. I told myself it was the wind. We get strong gusts up on that hill. The latch is old. With enough rattling, I figured it could have slipped loose. I walked over, checked it, and pushed the gate back in place. The hinges squealed. When it clicked shut, I jiggled it an extra second just to reassure myself. It felt solid. "Spooky cemetery stuff already," Kyle said, laughing. "You should get overtime for that." "Yeah, right," I said. "It's just the wind." After that, I started paying more attention, but nothing happened for a week or so. Just the usual. The office smelled like old paper and coffee. The porch light on our house blinked once in a while when it rained. Dogs barked from down the hill when I walked my rounds, then went quiet again. I slept fine. Then I noticed the flowers. There's a grave near the angel, off to her left. I'd never looked at it closely before. One night, my flashlight beam passed over it, and I saw a glass jar with fresh flowers stuck in the dirt. Bright yellow and white. At first, I didn't think much of it. People leave things. It's a graveyard. But a few nights later, they were there again. I noticed because the flowers still looked fresh. No drooping, no browning edges. The jar had moved a bit, turned like someone had picked it up and set it back down. The stone itself is older, the name almost worn away. The date of death is early 1900s. I don't remember the exact year, but far enough back that I didn't expect regular visitors. I bent down, shined the light closer, and sniffed. They smelled like grocery store flowers. That faint floral detergent smell. I guessed someone was coming during the day when I was asleep. A distant relative? Or maybe someone who just liked that spot. "You see anyone bringing flowers?" I asked Kyle at breakfast the next afternoon. He shook his head, chewing his toast. "Nah, I don't really stare at the cemetery, man." "You do when you're high," I said. He grinned. "Okay, fair. But no. Maybe it's the grounds guy before you. Don't you have a day guy?" "We have a maintenance guy," I said. "Frank, he hates this place. I doubt he's out here arranging bouquets," well, Kyle said, shrugging. "Maybe they deliver." It was a dumb joke and we both laughed. It didn't feel like anything yet. Just a detail filed away in the back of my mind. Other little things started to stack up after that. The motion light by the office. Began tripping with no one there. I'd be halfway through my loop, maybe near the back fence, and I'd see it bloom on out of the corner of my eye. The bright circle would wash over the gate and the first few rows of stones. By the time I got back around, No car had passed. No person was waiting by the door. Just moths and the hum of the fixture. I blamed raccoons, or maybe branches moving in a certain way. The sensor's old. You tap the housing, and it buzzes, and the light flickers before it's at us. One night, as I walked past the angel, I heard what sounded like someone saying my name. Just one soft Aaron, behind me around the level of my shoulder. I turned, beams swinging over stones and trees. No one. The wind moved through the branches, and a dry leaf scraped my jacket. I told myself it was that a leaf, a trick of sound. If you're alone in a place long enough, your brain will feed you its own voice back at you. Still, I picked up my pace a little. Around this time, I started to notice the angel more. Not in a dramatic way. I'd just look up from the office window during my break and see her through the gate, the pale shape against the darker trees. It was like she'd moved closer. Even though I knew she hadn't, that's just what happens when you become aware of something. It comes forward. Sharper. Then one evening, standing at our front window with a mug of coffee, I realized she looked off. I thought she faced the road more, I said. Kyle glanced up from his phone. Who? The angel. Doesn't she usually face straight out? Like toward us, and the street. He squinted through the glass. Dude, I don't know. She's a statue. I haven't been measuring her. I almost dropped it there. But as we talked, I had this nagging memory of seeing her profile when I'd walked in from work. As if she used to be turned more toward the main path. Now, from where we stood, her body seemed angled just a little more toward our house. It could have been the way the porch light hit her, or the fact that I was finally paying attention. It's the angle, Kyle said. You're just looking from higher up here. She's not moving, man. Yeah, I said. I know. It sounds stupid even saying it now, but that was the first time I honestly thought the words, what if she is? A few days later, I went looking for her record. The office has a battered metal file cabinet with old maps and plot records. If a family calls, we can tell them where a relative is buried. I pulled out the folder for the section where the angel stands. The paper smelled dusty, brittle. Names were typed on thin cards. Some had notes in blue ink. I found the grave with the faded name and the flowers. I found the 2 stones on either side of it. But when I looked for the angel's base, there's a family name carved there. Tooth a card for that plot was missing. The numbers skipped. 1, 2, 4, 5. No 3. I went through the drawer twice. Then I checked a second time a week later, thinking maybe I'd been tired. Same thing. An empty space where the card should have been. Maybe we lost it, Frank said when I asked him. He was stacking bags of salt near the door, his breath cloudy in the cold air. Or maybe it never existed. These records are a mess. Shouldn't there be something? I said. Some note. There's a whole statue. It's an old place, he said. Stuff gets moved around. Don't worry about it. He didn't meet my eyes when he said it. His tone wasn't mean, just final, like he didn't want to be involved. A few days after that, when I dropped off the property log at the small administrative office downtown, I asked the clerk there too. Her name's Marcy. She's maybe in her 50s. Always in cardigans. Always chewing gum. Do you happen to know anything about the angel statue up at Ridgeview? I asked, setting the folder on the counter. She kept flipping through some papers. Which one? The big one by the front section, I said. Near the older graves? She paused just a second too long, then picked up a pen. Those graves aren't what you think they are, she said, almost under her breath. I thought I'd heard her wrong. Sorry, what? She shook her head. Some of those older plots were moved when they redid the road. Long time ago. People got upset. There were lawsuits. They don't like us talking about it. Moved where? Shuffled the papers in front of her like she'd suddenly remembered she was behind on something. I don't have all the details. If you're doing your job and nobody's causing trouble, that's what matters, right? I guess I said. She smiled without looking up. You don't need to worry about the statues, honey. Just make sure the kids don't spray paint them. That should have been nothing. Just a weird little exchange with a town clerk. But walking back up the hill that night, my key cold in my pocket, her first sentence kept replaying in my head. Those graves aren't what you think they are. I started checking the angel more carefully during my rounds. I'd walk past her at 9, again at 10, again after midnight. I tried to take the same path, same distance, so I'd have a consistent view. But sometimes she really did look slightly turned. Just a little. As if her shoulders had shifted an inch to the left, bringing her gaze closer to the line of our house across the road. I told myself it was the light. The moon was in different positions. Car headlights swept through sometimes when someone cut up the hill too fast. Shadows changed. Stone doesn't move on its own. Then came the night with the footprints. It had rained earlier, a steady cold drip all evening. By the time I started my shift, it had stopped, but everything was wet. The gravel sucked under my boots, and the grass along the edges made my jeans damp. Around 11, I heard footsteps behind me on the path, quick soft crunches that matched my pace. I turned, swinging the flashlight back. The beam showed wet gravel, a low stone, the dark rise of the hill. Nothing else. The sound stopped exactly when I stopped. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded wrong out there, too loud and then swallowed up. No answer. Just the slow dripping of water from branches and the far-off sound of a dog barking once, twice, then cutting off. The insects, which had been buzzing in the grass, seemed to go quiet all at once, like someone had turned down a knob. The air felt colder on the back of my neck. Probably just echo, I said out loud to myself. Sound bouncing around. I forced my feet to move again, and the crunching came back, just slightly out of sync with my own steps. I didn't turn around that time. I walked faster instead, back toward the gate, my hand tight enough on the flashlight that my knuckles hurt. By the time I reached the office, my heartbeat had slowed, and the sound was gone. I sat down, wrote in the log. 11 p.m., all clear. I didn't write anything about footsteps. After that, home felt different. At first, it was small. Little things. I'd lock the front door before bed, twist the deadbolt until it wouldn't turn anymore. And in the morning, it would be just slightly off. Not unlocked, but not fully snug, like someone had turned it halfway and then stopped. The bathroom window, which we usually kept shut because it sticks, would be open a crack. I blamed Kyle. "You keep forgetting to lock the door," I told him one afternoon. He frowned. "No, I don't. You're the one who leaves for work after me." "Yeah, but I check it," I said. "I've been checking it." "Maybe your hand's slipping," he said. "You're always half asleep when you come in." He wasn't wrong. I do stumble and tired. Still, I started testing the knob twice, 3 times, before I went to bed. Stand there, hand on the cool metal, and say out loud, "Locked." Just so I'd remember. One Monday morning, I woke up and found a trail of faint, muddy marks on the hallway floor. Nothing big, not dramatic. Just small, oval smudges, like the shape the heel of a boot makes. They started near the front door and stopped just outside my bedroom. I knelt down, touched one. The mud was dry by then, like it had been there for hours. "Kyle," I called. He shuffled out of his room in old sweatpants. "What? Did you come in late last night?" I said, "Like really late?" "Nah," he said. "I got home around 10. You saw me? You didn't go back out?" "Why?" I gestured at the floor. "You tracking mud?" He peered down, then shook his head. "My shoes are in my room, and I was on a register all night. Didn't walk anywhere muddy." We both looked from the marks to the door. The chain was still latched from the inside. "Maybe it was you," he said. "You come home through the front, right?" "I always take my boots off on the porch," I said. "You've seen me do it." "Well," he said, dragging a hand through his hair, "maybe you were extra tired and forgot. Could be old, we don't mop that much." He smiled a little at that, and I wanted to laugh with him. But my stomach felt tight. "Yeah, you're probably right," I said. That evening, while he was at work, I stepped out on the porch and looked across the road. The angel was in full view. In the dusk light, she seemed to be staring directly at our front door. Our porch light flickered. It does that sometimes, but it chose that moment to buzz and blink, going off for a second before snapping back on. In that gap, with my eyes adjusting, I could still see the pale outline of the statue across the dark road. Like my brain had filled in where the light left off. I went back inside and closed the door. Later that week, I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a plate, when I heard Kyle call my name. Aaron. His voice came from the living room, casual. I could hear the TV murmuring in the background along with it. "Yeah," said, drying my hands. "What's up?" No answer. I walked into the living room, still rubbing the plate with the towel. The TV was off. The couch was empty. Kyle's door was half open. His room was dark. I checked my phone. There was a text from him from 10 minutes earlier, running late. Manager asked me to stay and close. I stood there for a long second, listening. The house felt narrow and hollow around me. The fridge hummed. Pipes shifted in the walls. Outside, a car rolled past, tires whispering on the damp pavement. From somewhere far off down the hill, a dog barked, then stopped. I told myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd replayed an old moment in my head. Maybe I'd heard the TV from next door. Sound carries in strange ways in these old houses. Still, I slept with my bedroom door closed that night, which I almost never do. The next shift I worked, I decided I was going to settle the angel thing in my head. No more vague impressions. I brought a small notebook and sketched a little map of the front section of the cemetery during my first loop. I drew the gate, the office, the gravel road, and her pedestal. I marked a line from her to our house, using the road as a guide. An hour later, I checked again, same position. The line in my notebook still matched what I was seeing. I felt stupid, but weirdly relieved. Around 2 in the morning, I did my last full round. By then, the sky was clear. Stars were sharp, the kind you only see when the air is cold and dry. The wind had calmed, and the insects were mostly quiet. My boots crunched on the gravel, steady and even. As I came up toward the angel, I heard a car approach on the road below, its engine low. Headlights swept through the iron bars of the gate, throwing long shadows over the stones. For a second, the angel's face lit up bright white, and I swear I saw her eyes glint. There was no detail, really. Just 2 small, faint points, like light catching on wet stone, or on bits of glass. Or maybe on something left in the sockets by weather and time. They flared soft, then dimmed as the car passed, and the light moved on. I stopped walking. I could feel my heart in my throat. The statue didn't move. Her hands were still folded. Her head was still bowed. The folds of her dress still hung in the same worn lines. The air felt suddenly colder around my arms, like I'd walked into a pocket of shade. "Reflection," I said quietly to myself. That's all. But when I looked back down at my notebook, the crude little diagram I'd drawn earlier no longer matched what I was seeing. The angle I'd marked from her to our house was off. She seemed just a few degrees more turned, more aligned with the front of our place. I touched the page with my thumb, pressing it hard enough to leave a faint damp mark from the sweat on my skin. Maybe I'd drawn it wrong. Maybe I'd been careless in the morning, back at the house. I spread my lease out on the kitchen table while Kyle made coffee. The lease is old. The landlord never bothered updating the template. It still lists the property as Caretaker's Cottage, Ridgeview Cemetery. "I didn't know this was a caretaker's place," Kyle said, leaning over the paper. "Yeah," I said. "Guess so." There was another name on the old attached paperwork, barely legible under the carbon copy lines. I looked closer and realized it matched one of the worn stones near the angel. Same last name. The dates didn't make exact sense, like someone had reused the form and never fully erased the older information, but the connection was there. "That's kind of weird," Kyle said. "You living where that guy did? It's just a coincidence," I said. He tapped the window with his knuckle. "Maybe that's why she's looking over here. Job loyalty or something." I rolled my eyes, but I didn't laugh. Outside, the morning light was gray and thin. The statue stood steady on her pedestal. From that angle, it was hard to tell exactly where she was facing. That night, as I walked up the gravel path again, the world felt both familiar and off. The porch lights down the hill glowed in their usual spots. The air smelled like wet dirt and a little bit of exhaust from a passing truck. Yet every sound seemed to clear. The crunch of my boots, the soft tick of cooling metal from a parked car, the brief high note of an insect before it went silent. The gate was closed when I arrived. I know I shut it behind me. I remember the weight of it, the way the latch scraped before it dropped in. An hour later, when I circled back, it stood open just enough for a person to slip through without touching it. The chain hung loose. I walked up, looked around, saw no one. No fresh tire tracks, no cigarette butts, nothing. Just dark grass and stones sleeping in their places. I closed the gate and slid the chain through again. This time, I wrapped it an extra loop. When my shift ended, and I trudged across the road. Exhausted, the sky was the color of old paper. The birds were starting up. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and almost slipped there. Faintly visible on the wood floor was another set of marks. Not muddy this time. Damp, almost clean, as if someone had walked through wet grass and then stepped straight onto the boards. The prints were narrow, a little sharper at the heel, and there were more of them. They went from the front door toward the hallway, paused by the wall that faces the cemetery, then curved toward my room. I stood there with my boots still on, one hand on the doorknob. I could hear the fridge humming, the heater kicking on. From outside, faint through the window, came the sound of a car going by. The marks were already starting to fade around the edges, drying into nothing. I closed the door very slowly and slid the chain into place. When Kyle woke up, I pointed them out. By then, they were barely visible. "I don't see anything," he said, squinting. "They were clearer earlier," I said. They went right to my door, rubbed his eyes. "Look, man, you're working nights. Your brain's fried. You're overthinking footprints and statues and stuff. Take a day off. Ask for a different shift." "Got it," I said. "I need the hours," he shrugged, already drifting toward the coffee maker. "And maybe stop staring at graves all the time. Just do your rounds and go home." So that's what I tried to do. I stopped checking the files. I stopped drawing little maps. I forced myself to treat the cemetery the way I had at the start, just paths and stones and wind. If the motion light flicked on with no one there, I noted it in the log as light activity sensor and moved on. If I heard what sounded like my name, I told myself it was leaves or the creak of branches, or my own thoughts bouncing back at me. But ignoring something doesn't make it stop. One night, maybe 2 weeks after the footprints, I was sitting in the office around 1 a.m., fighting to stay awake. The heater was ticking along, struggling against the cold. I had my jacket zipped up and my hands around a mug that had gone lukewarm. I heard the sound of gravel outside. Slow, steady crunches. Not like a car. More like someone walking the loop. I checked the monitor. We only have one camera, an old one pointed at the gate. The screen showed the empty entrance, the bars casting thin black lines. No car, no person. The footsteps kept going. Not loud, but present. They came closer, passed in front of the office, and faded toward the back of the property. I told myself it was my imagination syncing up with the ticking heater. I told myself maybe it was a deer walking along the fence line. That happens sometimes, still. I took my flashlight and stepped outside. The cold hit me right away, like I'd opened a freezer door. My breath puffed out in pale clouds. The sky was clear enough that I could see my own shadow on the ground, faint from some distant streetlight. The gravel in front of the office looked undisturbed. I stood still and listened. No footsteps now. Just the faint whine of the motion light warming up over the office door, then the click as it settled to full brightness. The wind was low, barely moving the branches. Even the insects seemed to be holding their breath. I pointed my flashlight toward the front section, where the angel stands. She was there, of course. Same pedestal, same folded wings. But something about the line of her shoulders looked wrong again. She seemed turned even more, her whole posture oriented toward the road and beyond it, our house. If she'd had a face you could read, I think it would have been looking right at my bedroom window. I told myself this was enough. Tomorrow, I'd ask the boss for a transfer, or I'd quit. I'd find another job. Truck unloading, night stock. Anything that didn't involve a field of stone and an angel I couldn't stop thinking about. Back home. I I dropped my boots on the porch and stepped inside. The floor felt colder than usual under my socks, like the heat hadn't reached that part of the house. The air had that damp, earthy smell from the cemetery, the one that usually stayed outside. I checked the front door twice, locked it, slid the chain across, and went to bed. I woke up just after noon to a shaft of light cutting across my room. I'd forgotten to close the curtains the night before. The light fell in a straight line from the window to the foot of my bed. I lay there, half awake, and realized the angle wasn't right. The sun doesn't usually come in that sharp through that window. I sat up and pushed the curtain aside. Through the glass, up on her hill, the angel stood on her pedestal, perfectly aligned with where I was sitting. The line from her pedestal to the road and up to my window felt exact, like someone had drawn it with a ruler. It could have been my imagination. It could have been all the little things I'd been stacking in my head. It could have been nothing more than how the sun moved that time of year. Down the hall, the front door clicked. Wood settling. The heater hummed back on. From the kitchen, I heard a faint dripping, then silence. As if someone had just shut off the tap, I waited, listening for Kyle, but the apartment stayed quiet. Sometimes, when I'm up too late now, I sit on the edge of my bed and listen to the house breathe, the creaks, the faint knocks in the pipes, the soft rattle of the old windows in their frames. Every little sound has a normal reason. Houses just do that. Cemeteries just settle. Statues don't move. I keep telling myself that. I still keep the curtains closed on the bedroom window that faces her.